I originally watched Breaking Bad in 2022 and absolutely loved it, which is when I got the idea to make an episode ranking video. At the time, the only similar video on YouTube was Source Brew's Better Call Saul episode rankings, so I thought I was good. Until literally everyone and their grandma decided to make a Breaking Bad episode ranking. Then I finished Better Call Saul and wanted an excuse to rewatch Breaking Bad, so here we are. Before I start, I want to clarify that the show has no bad or even mid episodes. Even the lowest rated episodes are still good, just weaker compared to the rest of the show. Also, warning for very light Better Call Saul spoilers, and obviously Breaking Bad spoilers. And a few of my friends decided to give their thoughts on some episodes, so when you see a random guy talking about Jane dying later on, that's who it is. Without further ado, here's all 62 episodes of Breaking Bad ranked from worst to best. Number 62, 38 Snub. Season 4 started out with one of the best episodes in the whole series, and the second episode is the worst in the whole series. Yeah, the aftermath of Box Cutter really isn't great, especially since everything non-drug wise that's going on also isn't great. For example, Hank and his minerals. I thought it was funny when he was bidding for minerals on eBay and Box Cutter, but now he's just being annoying and continues to be an asshole to Marie. As much as I really don't like Marie either, she's just trying to help Hank and be supportive while Hank's just being rude to her. On Skylar's side, she's trying to buy the car wash from Bogdan, which I don't mind, but it's also not the most interesting thing in the world either. On Jesse's side, he's hiding his clear depression due to murdering Gale by hosting a party at his house every single day for junkies to come to, and it's pretty sad. But I do like the scene with him and Andrea, obviously besides the fact that we have to see the demon known as Brock. And on the drug side, nothing's happening either. Walt and Jesse continue to cook after the murders of Gale and Victor, and that's really it. Walt buys a gun from the guy that sells Mike guns in Better Call Saul so he can be ready if he ever sees Gus. Just kidding, he tries to get to Gus multiple times so he can kill him, but thankfully Mike and Tyrus level with him. Speaking of that, this is the introduction to Tyrus, the most interesting and so much cooler than Victor character in the whole Breaking Bad universe, so you know, that's cool. But the one great thing we do get is the scene where Mike beats the shit out of Walt in the bar. It shows Mike's loyalty for Gus, and it's also satisfying seeing Walt get beat up because he was pretty annoying in this episode. Overall, it's a solid episode, but definitely the weakest, and I think the show's lowest rated episode being a 7 shows how good it really is. Number 61. Over. Yeah, this episode isn't great. Walt just found out that his cancer has gotten a lot better, and he's pretty pissed. Skylar has a party for him, and during her toast, she gives praise to Gretchen and Elliot for paying for Walt's treatment, which definitely kills his ego and pisses him off even more. This causes Walt to get drunk and also get his 16-year-old son drunk. Hank tries taking the bottle away from Walt, but Walt gets a bit angry and gets into a fight with Hank. I really cannot explain to you how much I hate watching this scene. I get that it's trying to show how dominant Walt is or whatever, but I really don't care. Bad scene. So for the rest of the episode, Walt tries to make it up to Skylar and Flynn by fixing the almost non-existent rot in his floor. Really entertaining stuff. We do get quite a few scenes with Skylar and Ted, which I, really cannot get enough of. And on Jesse's side of the episode, he gets into a fight with Jane, then they make up. The only reason I like this episode more than I would is because of the final scene where Walt meets a meth dealer at a supermarket and tells him to stay
out of my territory.
Which is a really cool scene. Even though it's still a good episode, my life would not be different if I never saw it. And neither would Breaking Bad's story. Everyone always talks about Fly being a filler episode, but this is definitely a filler episode. It's just an excuse to further characterize Walt, nothing more than that. Number 60. Down. This episode really isn't anything special. For every episode, I always write down small notes that I usually talk about during my review, which are usually parts I really enjoyed, really hated, or found interesting. I didn't write a single note for this episode. And that's mainly because this episode's purpose is to move the plot along and not much more than that. This episode shows both Walt and Jesse being at low points of their life after the Tuco situation, hence the title, Down. For Jesse, he gets everything taken away from him in the span of a day, and it's pretty sad to see him suffer like this. And on Walt's side, it's just Skylar being a bitch and not talking to him. I know Walt's been lying for weeks at this point, but you're lying if you don't think she's being a bitch about it, and the scene of her smoking while pregnant always pisses me off. Anyways, I do like the scene where Walt and Jesse fight in the RV, but that's about it. Still a good episode, but this is definitely one of the slowest points of the show. Number 59. Bit by a Dead Bee. I don't have much to say about this episode. It's really just the aftermath of 202, which causes Walt to fake a fugue state, and for Jesse to be caught by the feds, but released since they had no evidence. I do like the scene where Hank interrogates Jesse a lot, and even though I don't love the Hector scene for obvious reasons, I also don't hate it because it's already showing how much Hector hates the DEA this early on. On Walt's side, he's kind of just trying to get out of the hospital the whole time. This is also the early signs of the Skylar being a bitch arc, which mainly starts in the next few episodes, but you can see it a little here. Yeah, I don't have much to say. Solid episode, but nothing crazy. Number 58. Open House. Besides Fly, this is usually considered the worst Breaking Bad episode, and while I can understand that, I disagree. The episode is mostly about Marie stealing shit from open houses, which I hate a lot, and so does everyone else. I understand that she's just trying to get away from Hank, which I do understand since he's being an asshole, but she's also just such a bitch, so having an episode where she's the main character is not fun. But besides those scenes, this episode is actually really good. Walt and Skyler continue on their mission to buy the car wash from Bogdan, whose offer is currently $20 million. But Saul has a new plan, which is to trick Bogdan into thinking that he has a dirty water supply, so Bogdan goes back to deal with Skyler. They go along with this plan and we get the first appearance of Kubi. This plan works and Skyler is even able to bargain down to $800K. I just think this is a cool subplot that sets up the car wash, which stays in the series till the very end. Overall, definitely one of the weaker Breaking Bad episodes, but definitely not the worst. Number 57, IFT. To be honest, the last 10 minutes of this episode kind of kill it. The first 35 minutes are really great. We get a really long scene of Skyler trying to get Walt out of the house by calling the cops, but failing when she doesn't tell them what it is that he did. And Junior also gets really mad. On Jesse's side, we don't get much, but there are a few scenes of him repeatedly calling Jane's number just to hear her voice from the voicemail. And the last one of these scenes shows her number go out of service, which gets Jesse to go back to cooking meth since he has nothing left. And on the cartel side of the episode, we get our introduction to Bolsa, who doesn't really do much in Breaking Bad, but is a big part of Better Call Saul. Speaking of Better Call Saul, the meeting with Gus, Bolsa, and the Salamancas feels like it's straight out of that show, and it's the first of its kind, really. I probably didn't care much for this scene on my first watch, but after watching Better Call Saul, this scene is one of my favorites in this episode. But then we get to the last 10 minutes, and we get introduced to another Hank subplot, which is him getting promoted back to El Paso. He clearly is not happy about this, and decides to take his anger out on some random guys at a bar, which is pretty stupid of him, and it's not a fun scene to watch. Then Skyler fucks Ted. Need I say more? I know she's just trapped and whatever, but is your solution really to fuck Ted? I don't hate Skyler as much on my rewatch, but this still kind of pisses me off, and seeing them make out is not fun either. Great episode that's slightly ruined by the last 10 minutes. Number 56, Breakage. This episode is really just more of down, but better. On Walt's side, he and Skyler still aren't on the best of terms, and he finds out that Skyler's been smoking. But thankfully, it's not the focus of the episode. Speaking of Skyler, we do thankfully get the final scene of her and Marie arguing about the stupid tiara. Even though I'm annoyed with this subplot at this point, at least it's over. On Jesse's side, he finally isn't broke and buys a car and rents a new apartment, where we get the introduction of Jane. Then Jesse starts his new meth business with Badger, Skinny Pete, and Combo as sellers, which is definitely my favorite part of this episode. I'm always more interested in the drug business of the show than whatever drama Walt's family's going through, so it's nice to see good balance between them. Skinny Pete also gets robbed, which leads to the plot of a much better episode that I'll talk about later. And we also get a Hank subplot for this episode, where he gets promoted to El Paso and has PTSD over the Tuca situation. I don't really care for this subplot too much, but I definitely think it's necessary to Hank's character, and it's far from bad. Overall, very solid, moving the plot along episode. Number 55. I don't know how the fuck to say that. Definitely mostly a setup for half measures, but it's still really good. On Walt's side of this episode, Skyler tries getting involved in his money laundering where she meets Saul, who wants them to purchase a laser tag place. This is the most Saul thing ever and I love it. Walt and Skyler both think this is stupid as fuck, and Skyler thinks of buying the car wash that Walt used to work at instead. But Jesse's side of the episode is where things really pick up. Skinny Pete and Badger aren't selling much of the meth that Jesse's giving them, so Jesse tries to raise up this girl named Andrea to prove to them how it isn't hard. His plan seems to work until he realizes that she has a kid named Brock, the worst fictional character ever made. Andrea ends up telling Jesse about her brother named Tomas, who is only a few years older than Brock, who got recruited by a local gang and killed someone a few months ago, and Jesse puts the pieces together that Tomas was the kid that killed Combo. Jesse then goes to the corner Tomas is at and buys the teeth off him, which is an amazing scene and a perfect cliffhanger for half measures. Solid episode, but mostly exists just to set up half measures. Number 54, Moss. I don't have much to say for this one. I didn't even have any notes. Just a really solid episode. It's basically about Gus trying to convince Walt to get back into cooking, which he isn't able to do until Gus shows him the super lab for the first time. This convinces Walt, so he gives Jesse his half back, then tells him that'll be the last money he'll ever receive in the business. Jesse gets a little mad and throws a rock at Walt's windshield. Anyways, Skyler fucks Ted for like the 4th time, but she's starting to not feel at home in his house anymore, which I do not care about. And Hank turns down El Paso because he wants to find Heisenberg, and actually gets a lead on Jesse. Definitely more of a setup for the following episode, still really good though. Number 53, Negro. I don't speak Spanish, bro. I have no fucking idea how to say that. This episode has a lot of different plots, but I'd say the main one is Walt and Jesse expanding their territory again now that this whole town thinks Jesse is some murderer that's not to be fucked with. First of all, we get this banger of a song as the intro, which symbolizes Walt's reach to Mexico or something. I don't really know, it's cool though. On Jesse's side of the episode, we do have him getting to know Jane more, which of course gets expanded on with the rest of the season, but it's still cool to see where it starts, and I love the final scene. We get Skyler getting a job at Ted's company. I wanted to take off points for this episode being the introduction of Ted, but he's not really a loser yet, so it's okay. And finally, we get Hank in El Paso. I don't really care for the whole Tortuga thing, but I do think the scenes of Hank trying to act like he does in Albuquerque are really funny. He does that a lot in general. It's one of my favorite parts about his character, to be honest. Anyways, cool episode. Number 52, No Mas. I wouldn't say this episode has a definitive plot to it. All the plots are kind of meshed together, especially because of the name. No Mas is Spanish for no more, which can symbolize no more meth for Walt, no more drugs for Jesse, no more rehab for Jesse, no more family for Walt, no more guilt from Jesse, and probably a bunch more I'm forgetting about. And that is kind of what the episode is about, trying to forget the past and trying to start a new life. I guess besides Skyler, since she's not exactly forgetting the past. There are definitely some memorable moments in this episode, like
$500,000 in cash.
as much as you could call Hank stupid for not just opening the bag. Right before this, he was literally saying how he didn't want to get into Walt and Skyler's business. Besides the fact that jokes like that are Hank's whole personality, so obviously he wouldn't take that too seriously. Also, besides the fact that Walt and Skyler are kind of notoriously poor, so why the fuck would Walt have $500,000 in cash in Hank's eyes at least? Alright, enough yapping. Anyways, this is also the episode where Walt finally tells Skyler that he's been making meth, which she does not appreciate. We also get the fantastic scene of Walt trying to downplay the whole plane crash to his whole school, which a lot of people don't like, but I don't really hate it. I like how it shows the more analytical side of Walt's character, and also he's obviously not just trying to downplay the situation to everybody at the school. He's trying to downplay it to himself, since he's technically the reason the crash happened. Although the scene is a bit cringe, so I do understand why people don't like it. Anyways, a great slow episode. Number 51. Holy shit, I didn't even realize I put the episode called 51 at number I swear to God I didn't do that on purpose. I actually just realized that. Our first season 5 episode, and it's this high up. This is definitely the slowest episode of the season. It has much more to do with Walt's personal life, which is why it's my least favorite. Plotlines with Walt's personal life can definitely be done well, but I don't exactly enjoy watching scenes like Skyler trying to drown herself and Walt awkwardly kissing her in bed. We get the scene where Skyler says she wants Walt's cancer to come back, and while we are still rooting for Walt as he is the main character, it's very hard not to understand where Skyler is coming from. I wouldn't want my kids around Walt either. I do enjoy what's going on with the drug business though. Mike has Jesse go to Madrigal to get methylamine from Lydia, but they find a GPS at the bottom of the barrel. When Jesse shows this to Mike, he already knows that Lydia put it on there, so she doesn't have to give them the methylamine, and he tries leaving so he can kill her, but Jesse tries stopping him, and I love this dynamic. Both of their reactions fit their characters perfectly. Then Walt is just in the back acting all mysterious. Not much happens in this episode, so it's not really surprising that it's the worst of season 5. Still very good though. Also, I swear to God, I did not put this at number 51 on purpose. I ordered these at like 4 a.m., okay? I actually didn't do that on purpose. That's wow. Number 50, Grey Matter. Definitely my least favorite season 1 episode, but that doesn't really mean much. It's still a great episode. This is just another episode of Walt's family trying to deal with his cancer, but we also get introduced to Gretchen and Elliot, and this is the first time we see Walt's ego really shine. On the other hand, we have a small Jesse subplot where we get introduced to Badger, who he tries to cook with, and it does not end well. I really don't care for this subplot at all, but I think the talking pillow scene makes up for it on every level. Not only is it funny, it's really emotional, and I think everyone brings up a good point on what they think Walt should do regarding his cancer. Definitely one of my favorite season 1 scenes. Number 49, Greenlight. This is one of the funniest episodes due to the first few scenes alone. The first scene is Walt trying to talk with Ted, which is so funny. Walt is acting like an actual lunatic after he finds out that Skyler has been having an affair with Ted, so he tries breaking into Ted's office while embarrassing Skyler in the process. This is practically instant karma for Skyler sleeping with Ted because now everyone at work thinks she's a whore, which is pretty satisfying to see. But that doesn't stop her from sleeping with Ted again. Because she does. Anyways, after this incident, Mike brings Walt to Saul's office where Saul makes some funny remarks that he missed a bugging Walt's house, which causes Walt to beat the shit out of him and fire him. Walt then sexually assaults Carmen, which is so fun to watch, may I add, and gets fired from his job, and while he walks out, he sees Jesse waiting for him. Jesse then shows him what he's been cooking, but Walt's ego doesn't accept this, and he calls Jesse's product inferior. Then the rest of this episode is Hank trying to get his mind off El Paso by tracking down Jesse, while Jesse tries to get in contact with Gus. And it ends with Victor paying both Walt and Jesse for Jesse's product, which is a ploy to get Walt back into the business. This episode is already really good on its own, but the entertaining moments definitely put it a lot higher. Number 48, Kafkaesque. One of the best slow episodes for sure. The intro to this episode is one of my favorite intros of the whole show. It starts as an ad for Los Pollos Hermanos, then turns into a cooking and distributing montage. Really cool stuff. This episode is mostly just more of Hank being in the hospital, but Walt is back to cooking now, and Jesse is tired of making extra meth that is being sold for so much, while Walt and Jesse are only making $3 million in total. I like how Walt says,
You are now a millionaire. And you're complaining?
Yet 2 seasons later, he makes a whole big deal about the methylamine being worth millions. Anyways, Jesse starts to sneak meth out of the lab to try to sell with Pete and Badger at the rehab meetings, which is so fucked up, but leads to one of my favorite Jesse scenes, season 4, so I'm not complaining. Anyways, we get another Ted scene, which I'm sure we've all been dying to see. This one is even worse than usual. He stops by and decides to get mad at Skyler for not introducing him as Skyler's boyfriend to Marie, even though Skyler definitely isn't suffering immense grief from her brother-in-law almost getting killed by 2 cartel members. I would say that I don't understand how anyone likes Ted, but I've never heard anyone say they like Ted. So, never mind. Anyways, this episode is also the beginning of Walt's fake casino story, which Skyler somehow thinks of on the spot. It's a really good scene, and it's obviously symbolism for what Walt actually did, since practically everything is the same, but meth is replaced with the casino. Really good slower episode here. Number 47, Bullet Points. Really solid episode here. On Walt's side, he and Skyler read over a script that Skyler made to present to Marie, Hank, and Junior about Walt's gambling addiction. This is probably my favorite scene of the episode due to how Walt reacts to the script Skyler wrote. Even though it's showing his massive ego, it's still funny. They go to the Schrader's house and present the script, but Walt is also shown a video made by some guy named Gale, who is apparently Hank's Heisenberg. Walt tries to find out as much as he can about this Gale guy, and Hank tells him that the killer hasn't been found yet, but they're working on fingerprints. So Walt rushes to Jesse's house. This leads to my other favorite scene of the episode, where we get the first appearance of Buzzcut Jesse. I assume this is supposed to symbolize Jesse not caring about anything in his life anymore, which is very apparent in this episode, but he still looks cool with this haircut. On Jesse's side of the episode, we get to see him play Sonic Racing. He calls Mike's bluff, which, as much as I love Mike, is pretty satisfying to see. And we get him drive off with Mike instead of cooking with Walt, which sets up the next episode. Not the most eventful episode, but still great. Number 46, a no rough stuff type deal. To be honest, the Tuco scenes kinda carry this episode. Obviously I enjoy the heist scene where they steal the methylamine, but the subplot with Marie stealing the tiara sucks. I understand that it's trying to expand Marie's character, but that's exactly why I hate it, cause Marie's a bitch. It's also so incredibly boring compared to the rest of this episode, since on Jesse and Walt's side, they have to cook a certain amount of meth in a week unless the lunatic Tuco will kill them. If they're not able to get methylamine, which prompts them to steal it, then their RV breaks down, which causes them to have to cook in Jesse's basement while an open house is going on. All of that compared to Skyler almost being arrested for trying to return a baby tiara, then confronting Marie about it. I understand that the show is about Walt and Jesse, not Skyler and Marie, but if you're gonna do a subplot, at least make it interesting. Anyways, the Tuco scenes are great, further show how much Walt has already changed in 7 episodes by when he doesn't have enough meth for Tuco. That convinces him into buying 4 pounds the next week. Definitely reminds me of Saul. We also have to appreciate Tuco scenes while they last, since this is the second of the 4 episodes he's in total. Only problem is that the other 3 episodes he's in are better. Doesn't matter, still a great episode. Number 45, Cancer Man. This was the first main continuing the story episode where nothing huge happens, but it still matters to the overall story. This is the episode where Walt admits to his family that he has cancer. We still need to wait 2 seasons for the drug admission of guilt. We also get to see Walt blow up Ken Wynn's car, which is a great scene. On Jesse's side, we get a funny scene with the introduction of Skinny Pete and Combo. Jesse's basically paranoid this whole episode until he stays at his parents' house for a few days, which I always like to see. I feel like this is a big episode for expanding Jesse's character, since the last 3 episodes he's just been seen as a stupid junkie. But now we get to see more of his personal life and sympathize with him more. Overall, it's a great character building episode. Number 44, Madrigal. Madrigal is basically a Mike Solo episode. It definitely dips in quality a lot from the first episode of season 5, but so does practically every single episode 2 in this whole show besides seasons 2 and 3. And at least it's not as big of a drop off in quality as season 4's. On Walt's side of the story, we see him once again manipulate Jesse, this time putting the blame on him by making him think that he had the Ryzen cigarette all along, even though he just secretly planted a cigarette with salt in his Roomba. Once again, great acting from Aaron Paul here. After this, Walt and Jesse try starting up their own meth business and ask Mike if he wants to do distribution, which he declines. If only this was his final decision, so much could have been prevented. Anyways, this episode is basically only Mike from here on out. We get the introduction of everyone's favorite Lydia, where she gives the names of 11 guys to Mike that could possibly snitch on them and get them arrested. Mike assures her that they won't, but since she's a stupid bitch, she orders the hit of Chow. Thankfully, Mike is actually competent and kills the other guy who killed Chow, then goes to Lydia's house to kill her. And the only reason he doesn't is because she could still get the methylamine for Walt's new empire. Definitely one of Mike's worst ever mistakes. We also get the scene where Hank and Gomi interrogate Mike, which is amazing. I love how he acts here, and it sets up a lot for Mike's character to be expanded on at Better Call Saul. Overall, it's a very solid episode, but season 5 is much better. Also, the last scene made me physically cringe so hard I was actually repeatedly saying stop in my monitor. Number 43. Cats in the Bag. This episode is kinda just dealing with the aftermath of everything that happened in episode 1, which is still definitely tense since Jesse and Walt need to decide who dissolves Emilio's body and who kills Crazy 8. They end up doing a coin flip, which gives Jesse the dissolving job and Walt the killing job. And they're both not good at them. Instead of killing Crazy 8, Walt makes him a sandwich and gives him food, while Jesse doesn't listen to Walt and dissolves Emilio's body in his tub, which... yeah. Skyler also finds who Jesse is and confronts him, which leads to one of the most meme clips in the whole show. I've seen it so many times, but it's still a funny scene. I love Jesse's facial expressions. There's a few other funny moments in this episode, like when Walter sees Crazy 8 in the street. But there's also some unintentionally funny clips. The scene where they try to start the RV made me laugh because of how bad the Ultra Key was, which I never realized. I mean, I know it was 2008, but it's still really bad. I also want to mention how cringe the breakfast scene is in this episode. People should really be talking about this one instead of Jesse's dinner with Walt and Skyler for the top 5 cringiest Breaking Bad scenes. Anyways, still a great episode, just not as good as the pilot. Number 42. Fly. Fly is getting the reputation of being the most divided episode among Breaking Bad fans. Most people either have it in the top 3 or 5 of their list, or they have it in the bottom 3 or 5 of their list. You're really never going to see someone that thinks it's in the mid-tier of the show. besides me. Now I understand why this episode's so divided. If you're a fan of character development, then I could totally understand why you would put this episode so high. But if you're more of a fan of the fast-paced, action-packed story, I could also understand why you would put this episode so low. I'm a fan of both, which is why it's around the middle of my list. Obviously this episode isn't about much. Walt and Jesse are literally just trying to kill a fly. But somehow this concept has turned into such a great episode. Easily my favorite scene is the one where Walt and Jesse just talk about their life, which is a good core to the episode. After Jesse gives Walt some sleeping pills, he just starts talking about when he would have liked best for him to die, which is when he realizes that the perfect time for him to die would have been right before he decided to go out and let Jane die. As much as Walt has turned into a selfish and pretty bad person, he still shows how guilty he feels over it. Obviously it's not immense guilt. If it was, then he would have admitted to killing Jane by now, but it's the kind of guilt that Walt definitely doesn't want to live with, but now has to. We also get a great scene where Walt apologizes to Jesse about Jane, which is crazy considering a certain thing he says a few seasons from now. We also get to see Jesse kill the fly, which is pretty funny since they make it look as fake as possible. Overall, while not one of my favorites, I definitely enjoyed this episode more than a lot of other episodes, so shout out to Fly. Number 41, I See You. This episode is mostly dealing with the aftermath of 1 Minute, which it does incredibly well. A lot of this episode takes place in the hospital, but we also get to see Jesse mess around with Gus's lab, which is pretty entertaining. But on Walt's side, he stays with his family as much as possible and lies to Gus about why they don't have 200 pounds yet. Gus then calls Walt's bluff by literally showing up to the hospital and feeding everyone Pollos Hermanos. They then have a small talk where Gus is very cryptic, which definitely adds suspense to their relationship. Also, Bolsa's death is a great scene. Hits way harder after Better Call Saul. Number 40, Problem Dog. Amazing mid-season 4 episode where we get even closer to the downfall of Gustavo Fring. But before we get to that, Walt blows up his son's car. Very iconic and funny scene. We see Walt give Jesse some ricin to give Gus next time he sees him, and he actually gets a chance to put it in Gus's coffee, but he acts too slowly and isn't able to. Jesse goes to a rehab meeting and uses a problem dog as a metaphor for Gale, and he ends up revealing why he's there in the first place. Great scene. But my favorite scene of the episode is the final one with Hank. First of all, it's the first time we've seen Gomi since season 3. Second, we get Hank presenting all of his evidence against Gus. He finds a paper in the vegan named Gale's house with the code on it that correlates with the machine that helps in the process of making meth, and the paper has a Pollos Hermanos logo on it. Hank says that he thinks Gus is related, but Gomi and Hank's ASAC don't buy it, until Hank shows them Gus's fingerprints at Gale's apartment, which is where the episode ends. Even though this is just setting up the next episode, I still really love seeing Hank back to the DEA shit instead of whining about minerals to Marie, and especially since it's leading to the downfall of Gus. Number 39, Caballo Sin Nombre. Definitely one of the best slow episodes of the show. This episode is mostly about Walt trying to get Skyler to accept him back into their home again, since Walt Jr. is getting really frustrated about their separation. But the main reason I love this episode is the amount of legendary scenes it has. This is the episode with the pepper spray scene, the
Why you gotta be such a bitch? Hey.
scene, the Walt throwing the pizza on the roof scene, the Saul exposing the meth lab scene, the
Bought the place.
scene, and the Walt almost getting his head chopped off by the Salamanca cousins scene. I guess if there's this many legendary scenes, then it's probably not considered a slow episode, but there's still not much happening plot-wise. I honestly like Jesse's subplot just as much as Walt's, seeing as he's just trying to recover and get a better life by getting his house back. Saul also continues to be a W, and it's really funny seeing him continuously try to get Walt and Jesse back into the meth business. Great episode. Number 38, Cornered. Cornered is a very underappreciated episode. Most people probably know this episode as the one with
I am the one who knocks.
And while that is the best scene, there are some more amazing parts as well. On Walt's side, he gets the keys to the car wash from Bogdan and takes Bogdan's first dollar to buy a soda. I was actually bewildered the first time I watched this scene. This is not the same person that was driving an RV in his underwear a few months ago. Walt then buys Junior a nice-ass car, which definitely doesn't cause any problems with his money laundering story at all. Meanwhile, Jesse's still doing these pickups with Mike every day, but Walt starts to wonder why they chose Jesse specifically to do these. Walt then realizes it's the only way Gus will be able to get Jesse to turn against Walt. He says it in an incredibly egotistical way, like always, yet he's right, which is the scariest part. We also get the scene where Jesse tricks the meth heads into getting out of their house. Very good episode. Number 37, And the Bags in the River. This is basically a part 2 of the second episode where I like how in the intro to part 2, I said, this is basically just a sequel to episode 1. Then in the episode 3, I said, this is basically just a sequel to episode 2. Like, no shit, bro. This is basically a part 2 to the second episode, where Jesse already did his part, and now it's up to Walt to kill Domingo. And Walt makes the mistake of getting to know him beforehand. Walt then goes to get the key to let him go, until he realizes that Domingo has a piece of glass, which results in Walt having to kill him before he can stab him, which is a pretty sad scene for Walt and Domingo. I like this episode a lot because it further shows how much Walt hates his current life and feels trapped, like when the only person he talks to about his cancer is Domingo. It continues to lie to Skyler about where he is, which continues throughout the whole show, but whatever. And the subplot of this episode is Marie's bitch-ass thinking Walt Jr. is smoking weed, so she gets Hank to convince him to stop. I really hate the scenes with Maria in this subplot, but I'm not taking points away because the scene with Junior and Hank at the motel is pretty funny. Number 36, Mandala. What a wild episode. It starts with Combo getting shot by an 8-year-old. Even though that's a pretty sad death, we gotta pay our respects to Combo. Rest in peace. Anyways, this really fucks with Jesse, and he becomes a meth head and gets Jane back on drugs too. But while this is happening, Walt and Jesse go to meet with a very careful guy at some chicken restaurant, but Jesse shows up high and the man never comes to them. Walt goes back to try and find the guy for himself, which is where we're introduced to Gus, the main villain of the show, and one of my favorite characters ever. While I don't start to really love Gus until season 4, this is still a great introduction to his character and shows the basics of how he's gonna be throughout the show. While this is happening, Skyler's getting up to some shenanigans at Beneke and sings happy birthday to Ted. Please remind me to skip this scene next time I rewatch Breaking Bad. Anyways, Skyler finds out that Ted has been cooking his books, which is cool I guess, even though we need to wait another 2 seasons until it actually matters. Anyways, Walt goes back to Pollo's to see Gus and we get a random guy, also known as Victor, tell Walt that he has an hour to get all the meth to Gus or he can never show his face at Los Pollos again. So Walt rushes to Jesse's house to get the meth, but of course Jesse is knocked the fuck out off heroin with Jane. By the way, I really like the scene where Jesse gets high. So Walt has to break in and find the meth under Jesse's sink. Also, Skyler is casually giving birth while this is happening. If this episode ended 5 minutes earlier, it still would have been one of the best slow episodes, but the last 5 minutes make it not a slow episode, and also make it a lot better. Number 35. Phoenix. You guys have probably gotten tired of hearing my voice, so my friend Pharmacat, who is the guy that did the Breaking Bad character tier list with me on the Odyssey, is going to be covering Phoenix.
Hello. Hello. Today, I'm going to be talking about the one and only second to last episode in season 2. Oh, guess what? Guess what? Yes, you're correct! Breaking Bad! Oh my god! Stuff happens in this episode, you know. So let's get into it, my fellow Sigmas, you know. Starting off with the episode, in the first 2 minutes, Walter misses the birth of his own child and meets her right after she is born. So that's very Sigma. That's very Sigma indeed. And this fat fuck, Ted, is there, bro. I hate Ted, bro. I hate him. Skyler tells him to go home for like her duffel bag of stuff, like her for the baby and stuff. And then like he, meaning Walter, starts geeking in the car when he's at the house. Like he's tweaking, bro. And then he just starts going through a duffel bag of money. Like, it's the money he got from Gus or whatever. I think he's putting it into the wall at that time, but I'm not 100% on that. Because, like, I have not watched Breaking Bad in, like, 2 years. This is the first Breaking Bad episode I've watched in two years, bro. And then we're at Jesse's house. And all we see is drugs on a nightstand for like 10 seconds, bro. And then Jane gets a call from her dad for rehab or something like that. And then she sees a giant fucking hole in the door from Walt stealing the meth. And then Jesse sees all the meth is gone. And he starts tweaking, not knowing Walt did it. And then we go see Jane with some tweakers, but reformed tweakers. Since it's rehab, you know, and she is like nervous because she did drug-a-loonies and stuff like that. Then we go back to this stupid fucking baby in Walt, bro. I fucking hate this stupid fucking baby. God damn, hate this baby. On God, on God, D tier character, bro. Jesse calls Walt's home phone. And then Walt calls him a junkie imbecile. And then Jesse is on the phone geeking out about how someone broke in and stole his meth. And Walter just sighs and hangs up. And then at night, Holly wakes him up. Then he goes band for band with his infant daughter, showing her all his money and just puts her right to sleep, bro. She could not handle all the racks that this man had. And then it goes to the high school and stuff, and Jesse walks in while Walt is doing stuff, and Jesse starts screaming at him in a public school, and Walt just goes off on Jesse and tells him how he's a junkie and how he missed the birth of his daughter. And in my opinion, that's all justified. Like, Walt had all the reason to be doing all that, and he doesn't want to give Jesse the money and shit because he's a junkie, like I said. And then he calls Jane his junkie girlfriend. And Jesse gets angry and throws a fucking beaker at him. And then we're with this stupid fucking baby again. And Walt Jr. shows him the website he made. And then Walt goes to yap to Saul, and Saul tells him to just use the website to launder money because he knows of a friend of a friend of a friend. And then it pans back to Jesse doing heroin. He said he didn't like it like 8 minutes ago. SMH, bro. And then Jane tells him not to throw up. And then Jane calls her dad because she's late to rehab and shit because she like kind of did heroin the night before. And then as soon as she walks outside this house, it's her fucking dad, bro. Well, Jesse's house, I guess. And then he breaks into Jesse's house, but like he owns it and like whatever. And sees him in all the drug and beats Jesse. And it's a real tense scene. Like it's kind of sad. And then Jane's dad calls the police to give her a wake-up call. Because she doesn't want to go to rehab. Also, Jane is bad as fuck. Like, Jane, oh my days, bro. But Jane convinces him to wait, and she'll go to rehab. So no jail for Jane. Woo! And then Jane calls Walt's home phone, just like Jesse, and she tries to blackmail him for Jesse's money. And then Walt makes some good points and stuff for not wanting to give Jesse the money until he's clean, but Jane ain't having any of that. And it gives him an 8-hour or so deadline, so he starts getting the moolah ready for Jesse and gives it to him. And it seems like Walt really cares for him, which is sad and shit. And they decide they're gonna do all the heroin left, and Walt goes to a bar, meets Jane's dad, and it shows that he's just trying to be a good dad. I'm talking about Jane's dad. And then after their talk, Walt goes back to Jesse's house to talk. And then he fucking breaks in again, and he accidentally knocks Jane on her side while shaking Jesse, which makes her start to throw up. And then he just doesn't do anything about it. He stares at her dying, which is some D1 hater type shit. And her eyes were wide open by the end of it, so the last person she saw was probably Walt. And then that's the end of the fucking video. I mean, like, episode. She fucking died. I know I was meant to like put my thoughts after and stuff, but I kind of gave them while talking, so I don't know how. I was meant to do, I don't know how I was meant to shorten a 47-minute episode into 2 minutes of talking. So like, that was my part in the video. So like, bye bye.
On top for an episode where not a lot happens, it's incredibly well made. I really love the scene where Jesse goes to Walt's classroom to try and get his money. He seems really pissed the whole time, but as soon as Walt mentions his junkie girlfriend, he snaps and throws a glass at Walt, which shows how much he really cares about Jane and makes the end of this episode even more sad. Speaking of that scene, it's hard to watch like the over scene, but it's an amazing scene, and I personally think that it does a better job at showing how Walt has changed throughout the show, better than in the Flynn gets drunk scene. He went from not even being able to live with himself after killing someone who would have killed him if he didn't, to letting his partner's girlfriend choke just because she could cause problems with him business and law-wise. Anyways, great episode. Shout out to Matthew. Number 34, ABQ. Compared to Season 1, this is a much better finale. It still leaves an insane amount of unanswered questions, but at least we finally get the answer to the whole pink teddy bear thing. Also, in another Breaking Bad episode ranking I watched, the guy doing the ranking said the teddy bear scenes have no replay value, and I agree. I had to skip the scene in this episode. They're so slow and basically for nothing if you already know what they're going to lead to. Anyways, this is easily one of the saddest episodes in the whole series. Jesse has to deal with Jane's death, which he can't handle at all, and there are some amazing scenes. The one in the crack house made me tear up a little, honestly. Aaron Paul does such a great job in these scenes. He definitely made the episode. You could tell how much Jesse really loved Jane. It's heartbreaking. This is the start of my love for Jesse. His character post Jane is like a completely different person, and Aaron Paul does an amazing job portraying him for the rest of the show. By the way, I just want to say, I do really like Jesse in Season 2. It's just like, I like him even more after this episode. I just want to clear that up. I'm not saying I didn't like Jesse up until this point, but his character starts to become so much more relatable and emotional in the next few seasons, especially since he's mostly off drugs. Anyways, Walt is dealing with Flynn's website, which got them a spot in the news, which must be hurting Walt's ego so much. He also gets a surgery and accidentally tells Skyler that he has 2 cell phones, which is the beginning of the end. In the next few weeks, she finds out the truth for every lie Walt has told her besides the drug dealing, which makes her leave with Flynn and Holly, and is a pretty good cliffhanger for Season 3. Not an insane cliffhanger where you're dying to see what happens, but one that intrigues you enough to make you want to watch Season 3. The emotional value of this episode really seals the deal for me. Amazing episode. Also, this is the first episode with Mike, so, you know, that's pretty cool. Number 33, 737. What an underrated episode. The intensity of this episode is insane. It starts off with a flashback to the final scene of 107, then continues right where that left off, and it shows an incredible scene with Tuco trying to force Walt to do CPR on No-Dos until he ultimately dies. Not only is Tuco's dialogue hilarious, but it's also sad seeing how Gonzo has to put No-Dos' body under a stack of cars since Tuco didn't allow him to do otherwise. And it's also intense seeing Tuco look at Walt and Jesse, push Jesse to the ground, and then say, "You're done," which scares Walt and Jesse for the rest of this episode. Walt goes home after the scene, and I love Bryan Cranston's acting by showing how shaken Walt was from the encounter with Tuco, zoning out while Skylar calls him. What I don't love is Walt raping Skylar 30 seconds later. Anyways, we then get an amazing scene with Walt and Jesse in Jesse's house, where Jesse shows Walt a gun and Walt thinks of all the discrepancies in Jesse's plan. Great acting from Brian and Aaron. On Hank's side of this episode, we see him watch the footage of Walt and Jesse stealing the methylamine, which is pretty funny. We get him trying to do with Skylar and Marie's ongoing Tiara beef. Like I said earlier, I really do not like the subplot at all, but we do get a great scene where Hank confronts Skylar about not answering Marie's calls, and we get an amazing performance from Anna Gunn. Back to Walt and Jesse, we get another great scene with the introduction of Walter Ryson, which is used for plans throughout the rest of the show. Then, of course, we get the final few minutes of the episode where Walt and Jesse realize that Tuco is after them, which causes Walt to make the mistake of taking Jesse's gun. Then when he gets home, hides the gun in a diaper box, then gets kidnapped by Tuco at the end. I guess this episode isn't talked about much since the next episode is Grilled, but there's so many great scenes in this episode that definitely deserve more recognition. Amazing episode. Number 32, Shotgun. Shotgun is very memorable, at least to me, due to the fact that it's the episode where Mike and Jesse get the dead drops. This is the main plot of the episode, and it's really great. This is really the start of Mike and Jesse's relationship, which is one of my favorite duos in the whole show. But to be honest, I prefer the Walt subplot of this episode. White's go over to Hank and Marie's house for dinner, and we get one of, if not the most important scene in the whole show. While Hank is discussing Gale, who he thinks is his Heisenberg, a jerk Walt interrupts and says that he thinks Hank's genius is still out there, which is the sole reason why Hank continues to look for her and eventually finds Heisenberg. And it's a prime example of Walt's ego completely fucking with everything, and it's such a great scene. This episode also has one of the best cliffhangers of the whole show, which has Hank looking over pictures taken at the scene of Gale's murder, where he notices a little discrepancy. I remember being on the edge of my seat after watching this ending for the first time. Another incredible season 4 episode. Okay, so if you've made it up until this point in the video, then we are halfway through the list. I doubt it's halfway through the video because I'm gonna have a lot more to say about, the higher up, episodes, because they're better. But this is the halfway point in the list. I just thought for an interlude, it would be cool if I ranked every single season of Breaking Bad. I'm not going to be able to talk about like the number 1 and 2 too much because, still a lot of episodes that I have to talk about from those seasons. But, just to get my thoughts real quick. So coming in at last place, number 5, we have season 2. Everybody knows season 4 or 5 are number 1 and number 2. There's no official ranking for number 3, 4, 5, but it's seasons 1, 2, and 3, whichever way you rank it. But my personal least favorite is season 2, just by a tiny bit. It's just a tiny bit lower than my 4th place. But yeah, season 2, I just feel like has the weakest episodes, as you saw. I'm pretty sure 3 out of my 5 lowest rated episodes were season 2. After Grilled, season 2 is just kind of not bad, not even mid. It's good, but it's compared to everything else, it's nothing crazy. Over, Down, Bit by Debbie, like I was saying, Breakage isn't incredible. There's some weaker episodes in there, but I mean season 2 also has some of the best in the whole show. Again, I'm not gonna say because we still need to talk about those episodes, but there are some bangers in season 2. There are some top tier episodes in season 2. I think every season of Breaking Bad's amazing. This one just happens to be the weakest. I just think it's probably the least consistent. It's a very eventful season, but I just think it's weaker than the other ones. So yeah, that's number 5. Number 4, I'm gonna put season 3. I feel like a lot of people consider season 3 the weakest, which obviously I understand since it's my number 4. And it's just a tiny bit better than season 2. I just think it's a bit more consistent. I think every episode of season 3 is at least great. I don't think there's any episode below an 8 out of 10 in season 3. And again, as with every single season, there is at least a few top tier episodes. My number 3, we have season 1. This might surprise people that this is in the middle of my list. I don't really know. I don't know what the consensus is on the first 3 seasons, which one's the best, which one's the worst. I think season 1 is slightly better than season 2 and 3. I mean, I don't know, man. It's just so consistent. That was kind of what I was complaining about the last 2 seasons, even though they're amazing. I'd probably say it's the most consistent season besides one that I didn't mention yet. But I mean, obviously it's 7 episodes, so I feel like that's a given. It's how do you really mess up 7 episodes? And they're all great episodes. Again, There's some top tier ones. And yeah, I just like, you know, Walter White's origin story. He's my favorite character in the show. You know, obviously this season is like mainly about him. Like, you get a lot of expansion on other characters like Jesse and Hank and Gus in other seasons, but season 1's mainly Walt. So, you know, that's cool. And yeah, I don't know, season 1, I just think it's cool. Walt with hair, you know, it's like it's the origin story. At number 2, we're gonna have to put season 4. I'm sorry for this being like a predictable list. You probably could have predicted this whole thing. This is just my thoughts. On my first viewing of Breaking Bad, season 4 was my favorite. As you can see now, you could probably tell what my favorite is if you could do process of elimination. I've come to realize that season 4 is probably, maybe besides season 2, is probably the least consistent season. I mean, like, I said this earlier, but like, you go from season 4 episode 1, which you'll see is a very highly ranked episode on my list, and then you go to like 38 Snub, which is like the worst episode in the show, and then like Open House isn't amazing either. So yeah, I just think there's definitely some weaker ones in season 4. I think it's less consistent than season 1, honestly. The only reason I put it above season 1 is because the highs in season 4 are so high. You'll see later on. I can't really say much, but like I mean, if you've watched the show, you know how many good, but even like the middle of the season episodes are still like amazing. Like, it's crazy, man. Yeah, I don't know, I love like Gus is, you know, an amazing character, and this is like a big season for him. Season 4 is just amazing. And then number 1, obviously season 5. Originally I was going to split season 5 in this ranking into, you know, 5A and 5B, until I rewatched season 5 and I realized that both 5A and 5B are better than every other season. Like, I thought like maybe I'd put season 4 above 5A, but no, season 5A washes season 4, and like, I literally did not expect that, but like season 5 is like so good. Like, I'm pretty sure I've talked about 2 season 5 episodes, and season 5 is the longest season. Season 5 is 16 episodes, and I've talked about 2 of them, and I've talked about more than 2 of, I'm pretty sure, every other season so far. So that kind of shows this is the longest season, and I've talked about the least amount of episodes so far. That shows, I feel like that speaks for itself. Yeah, I can't really say anything, so let's just move on with the ranking. Number 31, Peekaboo. This was always a favorite of mine and still holds up. What I love about this episode is that both plots are pretty much equal. This is mainly a Jesse episode, which we don't get a lot, and even though I prefer his character later on in the show, this episode starts showing how good Jesse is with kids, and also how he's not to be fucked with business-wise. In this episode, he gets revenge on Spooge, who is the guy that robbed Skinny Pete. When he goes to their house, he finds a kid that is barely taken care of. He's hungry, dirty, doesn't have any entertainment. Jesse really feels bad for this kid the whole episode, and he takes better care of him in 10 minutes than the parents probably ever did in his whole life. Anyways, we get some wacky shenanigans with Jesse, Spooge, and his wife, where Jesse robs them and makes them pull meth out of their asses, which is an amazing scene, of course. Eventually, Jesse wakes up after being knocked out, and Spooge's wife pushes an ATM machine on Spooge's head, which kills him. She then passes out, and Jesse steals the ATM money, calls 911, and leaves the kid outside to get picked up by the cops. This is definitely a big episode for Jesse, and it's amazing, but they managed to keep the Walt subplot great too. Gretchen finally finds out that Walt has been lying to Skyler and Flynn about Walt's cancer treatment, and they go to a lunch where they get into an argument, which ends with Walt saying,
Fuck you.
Great scene, amazing episode. Number 30, Bug. Even though this is really the calm before the storm, this episode still has lots of conflict. Let's get Ted out of the way first. He's finally getting caught for tax evasion, and since Skyler's name is in all the books, she's trying to help him. But of course, Ted doesn't take his opportunities when Skyler gives them to him, and this ends up becoming much worse a few episodes from now. With Walt, Hank is still trying to get as close to Gus as possible while unknowingly involving Walt, which causes more tension between Walt and Gus. Speaking of Gus, he's having some cartel issues, and while he's being attacked, he goes out in the war area and does a little T-pose to not get shot, which is a legendary scene. The only way Gus can prevent this war is if he goes to Mexico and teaches them blue meth formula, which he obviously doesn't trust Walt with. So he gets Jesse to come. When Jesse tells Walt about this, Walt is more concerned with the fact that Jesse had a chance to kill Gus and didn't, and he knows this because he put a bug on Jesse's car. They both get pissed at each other and get into a physical fight where Jesse beats Walt's ass. This is probably the worst we've seen their relationship up to this point, and it is very tense. While the following season 4 episodes are obviously better, this one does a near perfect job of rising tensions and setting everything up. Number 29. Say My Name. This is one of the highest rated episodes on the show, and I understand why. It's mainly because the intro of this episode is the iconic
Say my name.
scene, which is where the title of this episode comes from, and the final scene is the death of Mike. While these are the 2 best scenes in the episode, I don't think the rest is anything that I would give a 10 out of 10, which is why it's right below that. First of all, yeah, Say My Name is a really good scene, although it definitely doesn't have the best replay value. In the context of a rewatch, it definitely does, but I can't just randomly put this scene on and highly enjoy it like I could with the train heist, for example. Still very well done though, it shows how far Walt has fallen. Speaking of that, this whole episode is just Walt being a crybaby. He does pull off the interaction with Declan very well, but his argument with Jesse is just him trying to manipulate Jesse into staying, because he has no one better, then not giving him his money because he doesn't give into it for once. Walt then goes to Todd because I guess that was his next best option, and we get a decent cooking montage. I also like how Walt says he's just as sad as Jesse is about Drew Sharp, then proceeds to replace Jesse with the guy who fucking shot him. Although Todd does seem like a promising cook partner, and obviously Walt cares more about money than the life of a high schooler. On Mike's side, shit is finally hitting the fan. After over 5 years of working for Fring, he's finally up. His lawyer gets caught depositing money into Kaylee's accounts, so he snitches on Mike to get out of the situation. Thankfully, Walt is at Hank's office right after this happens, so he's able to tell Mike that the DEA is going to arrest him. Mike is forced to flee and leave Kaylee at the playground by herself, which definitely hurts to see after watching Better Call Saul. He flees successfully, but needs a bag that has his money and gun in it, which Walt offers to deliver. But of course, Walt only does this so he can blackmail Mike into giving him the names of his 9 guys, and Mike's reaction is absolutely fucking destroying him. He says to his face how all of this is Walt's fault, and if he just cooked for Gus, then everything could have been fine, but he had to ruin it. It seems like Mike is right when he says it, but a lot of it is also Jesse and Hank's fault when you think about it, but Walt is still in the wrong here. Walt's ego gets bruised so much by this that he steals Mike's gun and shoots him. I love how Walt looks like a 4-year-old who didn't get what he wanted when he's walking back to get his gun. What I don't love is Mike's death. I don't hate it by any means, but after 3 seasons of Breaking Bad and 6 more seasons of Better Call Saul where he's a much more prominent character, this death just kind of feels a bit underwhelming. After all the backstory in Saul and even the countless amazing scenes in this show, a few gunshots from fucking Walter White feels a bit underwhelming to me. I guess it's just me though. I do think his final words are a perfect way to end his character though. Bravo, Vince, I guess. This episode is still incredible, just don't love Mike's death. Number 28, Rabid Dog. The weakest of Season 5B, but for this to be the weakest episode of a season shows you how good Breaking Bad is. This is the episode where Jesse teams up with Hank and snitches on Walt, but before we get to that, we see Walt arrive at his house seconds after Hank leaves, and he does everything in his power to get the gasoline smell out of his house, but it doesn't work, so he makes up possibly his worst lie in the whole show. Even Junior isn't buying this one. Walt decides that the family should stay in a hotel for the night so they don't have to live with the gasoline smell, aka so they don't get murdered by Jesse. They go to the hotel and Walt meets up with Saul and Kuby, where he calls Badger Beaver and can't even remember Skinny Pete. Put some respect on their names. Anyways, Saul uses another death metaphor by calling Jesse a rabid dog, and Walt yet again gets mad when he says this, even though he literally just killed Mike for the same reason that Saul is suggesting for Hank and Jesse. We can see who Walt's favorites are. Speaking of killing Jesse, after Walt tells Skyler what's actually going on, that's what she suggests, which is definitely not something I'd ever expect her to say. Then Walt and Junior go to the pool and we get a really sad scene where Junior hugs Walt after their conversation about Walt's cancer. It's a nice scene on first viewing, but it hits way harder after knowing that Junior is going to hate Walt 2 episodes from now. On Jesse's side, Hank follows him to Walt's house and stops him right before he burns it down, and we get the famous
You can't keep getting away with it!
I've seen people say this is Aaron Paul's worst acting in the whole show, and I cannot disagree more. Seeing where Jesse is mentally and emotionally at this point in the show, this is a completely believable way that he would act. I think Aaron does a great job as always. Jesse and Hank then have a sleepover, which Marie is only okay with because it's bad for Walt. Speaking of Marie, we finally get to meet her therapist, which I completely forgot about, and earlier in my rewatch I thought it would be cool if we got to see her therapist, so shout out to my bad memory. Anyways, Jesse tells Hank literally everything about Walt, and Hank records it. I do like this scene, but I would have loved it if there was some deleted scene or DVD exclusive or something of the full clip where Jesse explains the whole year-long story. Even if it was unscripted and it was from Aaron Paul's memory, I think that would be awesome, but whatever. Gomi doesn't think the tape will do anything because there's still no physical proof, but Walt leaves a voicemail to Jesse and tells him that he wants to meet up with him and talk. So Hank and Gomi plan to wire up Jesse and tape him while this happens. Jesse doesn't think this is a good idea and calls Walt gay.
Yeah, no, Mr. White's gay.
But he goes along with it, even though he thinks he'll get killed. Then Gomi asks Hank, what if Jesse's right? And Hank says, at least we got it on camera. So there are now 3 people rooting for the death of Jesse in this episode. Now that I'm reading the script, I realize that it's 4 because in the last scene of this episode, Walt hires a hit on Jesse, so this episode is just full of people that want to kill Jesse. That's great. Well, Jesse shows up and gets suspicious, so he leaves and comes up with a better idea. It's actually insane how an episode this good is the worst of its season. Well, at least the worst of its half of the season. Number 27, Hermanos. This is the first episode where we really get insight on the cartel. There were some meetings and hints of the cartel in season 3 and 4, but this is the episode where we get to see exactly why Gus has so much hatred for Bolsa, Eladio, and especially Hector. This flashback is so good, definitely the most Better Call Saul-esque scene of Breaking Bad. But besides that scene, this is still an incredible episode. Hank is still trying to prove that Gus is guilty, and the DEA has a meeting with Gus where they ask him lots of questions regarding Gale, and he does a great job of combating all of these with fake-ass claims that sound real. Everyone's buying it, besides Hank. So the next day he tricks Walt into driving him to Pollos Hermanos, where he gets Walt to put a tracker on Gus's car. Walt has both Mike and Gus watching him while he does this, so he goes inside and tells Gus that he didn't put the tracker on his car, but Gus tells him to
Do it.
so he does. Nothing crazy is happening between Walt and Gus yet, but tensions definitely rose with Walt's trip to Pollos Hermanos. And on Jesse's side, he continues sending checks to Andrea through Saul, which I enjoy. Overall, this episode is definitely leading to bigger things, but it's still amazing, plus the Great Cartel flashback. Number 26, Salute. While I did give this episode a 10 out of 10, you might notice that it's my lowest ranked 10 out of 10. And the only reason for that is because a lot of this episode isn't Jesse, Mike, and Gus in Mexico. If this whole episode was dedicated to that, then it would be way higher. And I'm not saying the subplots are bad at all. Walt's subplot sees him beaten up on his son's birthday after his fight with Jesse, and he has a talk with Junior about how he doesn't want him to think of Walt like this when he dies. While it is nice to see some more consequences of Walt's actions, putting it in the same episode where Jesse is cooking for cartel members in Mexico was not the best idea. We also have a Skylar subplot where she keeps trying to get Ted to pay his taxes, and even though she literally gives him over $600,000, he instead buys a car and continues to evade his taxes. But this episode is otherwise incredible. It's probably because I've seen Better Call Saul, but I love the scene at Eladia's house. Seeing Gus finally getting revenge is so satisfying. Plus the shootout with Jesse is great too. The scene where Jesse talks to the Mexicans at the lab is also amazing. Overall, it's a perfect episode, but if it had more Mexico scenes, it could be higher. Number 25, Sunset. This episode starts out pretty slow, with Walt buying a new apartment after signing Skylar's divorce papers while Hank watches Jesse. We also meet Gail and get a solid cooking montage. But as soon as Hank calls Walt to ask about Jesse, the intensity goes up by so much. Walt rushes over to the junkyard to get the RV destroyed, but Badger's there and calls Jesse, who Hank is following. Walt and Jesse both end up in the RV while Hank is right outside trying to get in, and this is where it gets really, really good. Thankfully, old Joe, yes, that's his name, comes to the rescue and pulls a Saul Goodman on Hank, telling him all the reasons why what he is doing is illegal. We then get this iconic line from Jesse.
This is my own private domicile and I will not be harassed. Bitch!
After a while, Hank calls for a warrant and stays at the junkyard, which forces Walt to have to call Saul and make him fake. After a while, Hank calls for a warrant and stays at the junkyard, which forces Walt to have to call Saul and make him fake Marie getting into a car crash, which is really the only way Hank would actually leave the site. The scene of the phone call and the hospital are both insane and amazing scenes. Props to Dean Norris. The episode also ends with Gus telling the Salamanca twins that they can kill Hank, so it's not looking good for him. Number 24, Buried. After Walt and Hank's first interaction after Hank finding out, they both immediately call Skylar, but Hank gets to her first and they meet up at a restaurant. Hank tries getting Skylar to snitch on Walt, but she does her usual act like the victim get out of the situation thing, and tries calling Walt. But Walt is at Saul's office waiting for Huel and Kubi to get back with his money. Speaking of that scene, it's really funny and iconic. Obviously Huel is great, but I really love Kubi on my rewatch. I apologize to the guy that got mad in the comment section of my character tier list when I put him into E tier. There's also the scene where Saul suggests sending Hank to Belize, which is hilarious, and Walt's reaction is so hypocritical. Then Walt buries his money and puts the coordinates on a fake lottery ticket. Back to Skylar, Marie and Hank go to her house to try to talk to her, but she only lets Marie in. Marie starts asking Skylar about how long she's known about Walt, and when she doesn't respond when Marie asks if she knew before Hank was shot, she slaps the shit out of her, then tries stealing Holly, which Skylar fights her over until Hank is forced to come in and tell Marie to give Holly back. I'm not usually a big fan of Skylar and Marie scenes since I don't like either of their characters, but this is actually my favorite scene of the whole episode. That crazy slap that Marie gives Skylar along with the insane fight over Holly, the acting in the scene is top fucking tier. It hits so hard when you realize that it was only 2 episodes ago when they were happily having a barbecue together, and now they're physically fighting with each other. Number 23, Crazy Handful of Nothing. Everything about this episode is just so good. The intro foreshadowing the final scene, the symbolism with the card and chemistry scenes, the funny ass scene with Walt and Jesse talking about Tuco, the tense scene with Walt and Hank with the missing items, Jesse relating Walt to his aunt with cancer, Hugo helping Walt throughout the episode just to be arrested for Walt's crimes at the end, the contrast between Jesse and Walt's interactions with Tuco, and of course, Walt's interaction with Tuco in general is one of the best scenes in the whole season, if not the whole show. I mean, come on. Sure, Walt blew up Ken Wynn's car a couple episodes ago, but now he literally shaved his head, used the name Heisenberg for the first time, and scared an infamous drug lord into giving him 50 grand. Definitely a huge turning point for Walt and the show in general, and overall a perfect episode. Number 22, Hazard Pay. This has got to be the most underrated episode in the whole show. This is where Walt, Jesse, and Mike start their new business, and we get a great scene where Saul shows the trio lots of different possible cook sites until they decide on using Vamanos Pest to hide their labs for every cook. We see the return of Skinny Pete and Badger by helping Jesse get cases to hide the equipment in, and it's nice to see them since they were pretty absent from season 4. Alongside bringing back old characters, we get introduced to a new character named Todd, who does some pretty funny things later on in the season. The cooking montage is amazing, since we haven't gotten a proper one since around season 2 or 3, and it might be the best one in general. The song they play is amazing. And we also get a great scene of Mike handling distribution where he gets into another argument with Walt. And before I say this, I want to clarify that I think Walt is a terrible person and has been since season 2, and I don't think he's some Sigma male that's right for killing a bunch of people. But I honestly think he's right in this argument with Mike. Mike's 9 gods that have to be paid have absolutely nothing to do with Walt and Jesse, so I don't understand why it's coming out of everyone's pay instead of just Mike's. I do think Walt's ego blinds a lot of rational decisions in this show, but I don't really think it's his ego in this case. He's actually right in my opinion. Anyways, besides meth stuff, we get a really weird scene where Skyler screams at Marie to shut up, which causes Marie to go to Walt's house and ask him what's up, and he casually exposes Skyler's affair with Ted to her. I completely forgot he did this, so I was mind blown when I saw this on rewatch. This episode's so good. Pretty much every scene of this episode is such a great moment. I love seeing Walt, Jesse, Mike, and Saul all together, and this episode feels a lot like a season 2 episode since it's solely based on handling a meth business, which I love. Extremely underrated. This is the lowest rated season 5 episode, and I completely disagree. Number 21. Buyout. Season 5 is just unbeatable, man. How the creators made a borderline filler episode a 10 out of 10 is beyond me. The episode deals with the aftermath of Dead Freight while also being a lead up to Say My Name, so it's practically a transition episode, yet so good. In the intro, we see Jesse punch Todd in the face, which is incredibly deserving, seeing how Todd's prank went a few hours earlier. The trio discusses how they'll deal with Todd, and for some reason the popular vote is to keep him on the team. I understand why Walt had this opinion since he's a fucking sociopath, but I don't know why Mike agreed to this. Well, I guess Mike is a sociopath as well, but that's besides the point. Meanwhile, Mike is still being followed by the DEA, and he tricks Gomi into thinking that he left a dead drop when it's really just a note that says fuck you. Common Mike W. Anyways, Jesse is really not taking the Todd situation well and keeps watching the news while Walt's trying to cook. Walt tells him that he'll finish the cook and that Jesse can go home for the day, then proceeds to calmly whistle after having a conversation about an innocent child getting shot by an associate of his. Actual psycho behavior. After this, Jesse decides that he's done, and so is Mike. They break the news to Walt and tell him that they're selling their shares of the methylamine for $5 million each, which Walt is frustrated with, but doesn't stop them. Not until the loser that they're selling to named Declan won't buy the methylamine until he gets all 1,000 gallons, so Jesse goes over to Walt's house to try and convince him. Get some iconic lines from Walt here. Then Skyler comes home and Walt has Jesse stay for dinner. Everyone always talks about how this is one of the cringiest Breaking Bad scenes, but I personally love it. Not only does it show how Walt has nothing left but cooking, but it's also hilarious. Jesse could definitely be the funniest character in the show if you'd let him. After this, Walt tries stealing the methylamine, but Mike is 10 steps ahead of him and makes him wait in the warehouse while holding him at gunpoint. After a while, Mike has to go to a meeting with the DEA, so he ties Walt up to a radiator so he doesn't escape and steal the methylamine. Surprise, surprise, Walt escapes and steals the methylamine, even if it's in the most psychotic way possible. We then leave off on a perfect cliffhanger to one of the best scenes in the whole show. This is most iconic. We then leave off on a perfect cliffhanger for one of the most iconic scenes in the whole show. This has a 10 for the same reason as Hazard Pay. It's just an amazing scene after amazing scene. Number 20. Blood Money. This episode is the start of the downfall. Well, I guess gliding overall is, but that's only one scene. This is the episode where Hank goes full investigation mode into matching all the puzzle pieces together. We get a great montage showing this, where Hank goes through pretty much every piece of evidence he's gotten over Heisenberg in the last year and correlates it with Walt, which is really awesome. Literally every piece of evidence he looks at is tied to Walt in one way or another. Then Hank confronts Walt and it's an incredible scene. Dean Norris definitely gets outshined by other phenomenal actors in this show, but this scene really makes you realize how great he is too. Hank names off some of the worst things Walt has done to his face, and it's incredible. This is something we've been waiting to happen for the whole show. I honestly don't know how Hank didn't catch him earlier. Walt literally told Hank to his face multiple times and Hank just shrugged it off. Well, besides the Hank stuff, we get a Walt fast forward at the beginning of the episode where he goes to his house to get the rice. And I love how the Hello Carol sequence happens in reverse of how you would think it would. Usually you would get something happen in the past, then get something similar happen in the future, but they switched it, which was cool. We get Jesse being depressed and throwing his money everywhere, and Skyler is kind of just back to liking Walt, which I found kind of weird. When he was in the business, she was calling herself his prisoner and saying she wished his cancer would come back, but as soon as he's out of the business, they're a lovely couple again. That's not a negative or anything, just something weird I noticed. Amazing episode though. Number 19, Half Measures. I really don't know how to start my review of this episode. It's just that good. Jesse wants to get revenge on the gang members who made Tomas kill Combo, so he tries getting Walt to give him some ricin, which he doesn't agree to. Walt really wants Jesse to not kill the gang members, so he tries making a plan with Saul to get Jesse arrested for a misdemeanor so he stays off the streets. Saul informs Mike about this plan, which prompts Mike to go to Walt's house and tell him to not take half measures, which is still one of the best Mike scenes ever, Better Call Saul included. Walt takes this advice to heart and informs Gus about Jesse's plans, since the gang members that Jesse wants to kill also work for Gus. Gus has a meeting with them all where he tells the gang members
No more children.
and he has to make peace with Jesse. All seems well until the gang members fucking shoot Tomas dead. I think they might have taken No More Kids a bit too seriously. As soon as Walt finds out about this, he knows where Jesse is and why he hasn't been answering his phone all day. So Walt rushes to the gang members' corner, and just right before Jesse is killed by them, Walt runs them over with his car, killing one of them, then getting out of his car, grabbing the alive dealer's gun and shooting him in the head. And the episode coldly ends with Walt telling Jesse to
Run.
This is easily a top 3 cliffhanger on the whole show, and easily a top 5 ending to any episode. And besides the ending, the episode's still amazing. I love how much Jesse cares about kids and keeping them pure. You can see how much he values that, and avenging one of his best friends. Walter's also becoming a lunatic by this point, but at least it shows how much he really cares about Jesse, since earlier in the episode, Walt seemed like a snitch. And somehow this season 3 plotline gets even better. Number 18. Pilot. If I'm being honest, I've probably only seen about 7 shows front to back. All great shows with great pilots, but none of them really come close to Breaking Bad's pilot. It perfectly sets up the whole show, whether it's by introducing main characters or introducing us to the world of Albuquerque. It does well in so many regards. Not only does it start the show up well, it's also a thrilling episode in general. I feel like if this was a short film, it still would be great because it doesn't rely on the rest of the show and feels like a whole different story inside a single episode. I don't really understand how anybody couldn't get hooked from this episode. The first scene alone is so tense and well made. As we progress through the episode, we see more parts of Walt's life, such as a funny ass scene with his family at breakfast, his 2 different jobs, and him being made fun of by Hank for not being masculine. This all culminates when he finds out that he has stage 3 lung cancer and has a few years to live. And after finding this out, he just stops caring. He focuses on small things such as mustard being on his doctor's shirt, he curses out Bogdan in this hilarious scene, and, of course, he goes on a ride along with Hank where he sees his former student Jesse Pinkman and blackmails him into starting a meth operation with him, which is still one of my favorite scenes in the show. We then get...
Got some big cow house way out that way, like 2 miles, but I don't see nobody.
Cow house?
Yeah, where they live. The cows.
our first cooking montage, and the introduction to Crazy 8, who is a minor but very important character in both Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul. Light Saul spoilers real quick, I find it really cool how tough Crazy 8 acts in this episode, seeing how in Better Call Saul he's very quiet. They feel like completely different people. Then Crazy 8 and Emilio force Jesse to bring them to Walt, and of course Walt does this smart chemistry shit and kills Emilio with red phosphorus and makes Crazy 8 pass out. It's insane seeing how tense it is for Walt to kill someone here, seeing as later on in the show he kills Mike and several other people without hesitation. Overall, Pilot still stands as a perfect episode, and it's probably the best first episode you could ask for from a show. Number 17. Live Free or Die. If Greenlight isn't the funniest episode, it's this one. The whole episode is kind of a standalone episode from everything else, since the majority of Season 5A is about the new drug business, but that's not a bad thing at all. This is obviously dealing with the aftermath of Face Off, where we see Walt, Jesse, and Mike hurry to destroy evidence on Gus's laptop, and we get so many amazing scenes. The scene in Mexico where Mike tries to shoot Walt is really great. It's insane how loyal Mike is to such a psychopath like Gus, but, you know, that's why Better Call Saul exists. The scene in Jesse's house where Mike and Walt argue is hilarious, and so is the scene where they test the magnets. Definitely some of the funniest scenes in the whole show. Not to mention the magnet heist is literally a GTA mission. This is also a big episode for Walt's character. I'm going to talk about Face Off being a turning point for Walt later, but this episode shows it to full effect. Killing Gus must have done something to Walt's ego, because now he suddenly is this, like, cunning lunatic who takes risks and is able to scare his lawyer and wife. Listen, I know cunning and lunatic kind of mean opposite things, but you know what I mean. And this only continues for the rest of Season 5, since he literally becomes a drug kingpin. Also, this is the first scene where we see future Walt, and it's really cool to see everything they reveal on rewatch. But the main reason why this episode is so high is because it's the final time we ever see Ted, which I think deserves a huge celebration. And not only is it the last time we see him, but he also looks like he's about to fucking die, so this might just be the best scene in all of Breaking Bad. All jokes aside, I actually am very happy that Ted's finally gone, but this episode is perfect besides that. Number 16. Gliding overall. This is the season finale for 5A, and it goes out with a bang. After the death of Mike, Walt has either accepted the fact that he's going to hell or he's turned psycho, so he meets Todd's uncle and his neo-Nazi gang and orders the hits of Mike's guys in prison. This is easily the best montage in all of Breaking Bad to me. I love the song that plays while this takes place, and it's even better since the vibe of the song is the exact opposite of what's being shown. The murders are insane, and Walt is just casually looking at his watch waiting for all the murders to be done while it's happening. Fucking crazy. I think this really might be the moment where Walter White... I think this really might be the moment where Walter White turns into Heisman. And not long after this, we get the second best montage in the entire show, with the song being Crystal Blue Persuasion. Not only does this montage show Walt's new empire in full effect, from cooking with Todd, to distributing with Lydia, to laundering with Skyler, it also shows the time gap of 3 months, and Walt ends up making around $80 million in this time period, which is fucking insane. After Walt sees the amount of money he has, he decides to finally quit, and Junior and Holly come back home. And this of course warrants a barbecue at the White's house, so Hank and Marie come over. Sadly, Hank has to take a shit and gets bored while he's on the toilet, so he decides to read a book in the White's bathroom that has some silly writings on them. In all seriousness, this is one of, if not the best ending to an episode. I'm sorry to anyone that had to wait a year for Season 5B after an ending like this. Actually insane. But besides the ending and two go-to montages, it's just really cool to see the end of Walt's empire, and also to see how much money he actually made from all this. This is only the beginning of the end, though. Number 15. Better Call Saul. I remember liking this episode the first time I watched the show, but after watching Better Call Saul, the show, not the episode, This episode's so much better. Saul is my favorite character in the Breaking Bad universe, so seeing him here is amazing and a breath of fresh air from all the drama that's been going on this whole show. This is the debut of his character and his iconic commercial, which I of course love. Anyways, I should probably talk about what's actually happening in this episode. Badger gets caught by the DEA in the intro and hires Saul as his lawyer. I love how Badger literally realizes that the guy trying to buy meth is a DEA agent, yet somehow still gets caught. Bro really thought a police officer lying is in the Constitution. Anyways, we then get introduced to Saul in an amazing scene, then Walt goes to his office and tries bribing him not to involve Heisenberg. This doesn't work, so their solution is to casually kidnap Saul and hold him at gunpoint in the desert. I of course love this scene, first because it introduces the trio of Walt, Jesse, and Saul, and also because of the foreshadowing has to Better Call Saul. I know it's been said a billion times, but it's insane how a single throwaway line created two of the best characters in the whole Breaking Bad universe. Anyways, Saul hires a fake Heisenberg to get caught instead of Walt, which keeps Walt's identity private and gets Badger out of jail. And the scene where the fake Heisenberg sits on the wrong bench is so tense. I really don't have any complaints for this. It introduces my favorite character and has some of the most iconic and funniest scenes in the whole show. Perfect episode. Number 14, Box Cutter. This episode is dealing with the aftermath of Gale's death, and it leaves off literally right after Jesse shoots Gale. Victor finds Jesse and brings him to the lab where Mike and Walt are, and they all wait there for Gus. Walt starts saying how they have to start cooking in the next 10 minutes to go along with Gus's schedule, so instead of letting him cook, Victor starts cooking himself since he's been monitoring Walt and Gale since the last episode. Meanwhile, Skyler is trying to find Walt, which I don't love, but what I do love is the contrast between Skyler and Junior having a happy conversation about breakfast and Walt and Jesse waiting to die in the lab. We also get to see Hank bid for some minerals on eBay, which is really funny for no reason. Then Gus shows up to the lab. He walks down the stairs, looks at Walt, then goes in the back and starts putting on a hazmat suit. While he does this, Walt starts yapping to a wall about how Gale was a good man, but there was no other choice than that Gus is at fault. Then he starts insulting Victor for having the inability to cook until Gus pulls out a box cutter. Walt starts pleading for his life in the most egotistical way possible. Then Gus casually slits Victor's throat. Obviously, I can't show this, but holy shit, the first time I saw this episode, I was mind blown. And I was still mind blown in my rewatch, even though I knew exactly what happened already. Gus doing this in the first fucking episode of the season just shows how he's not fucking around anymore, and this is definitely just the beginning. And this episode's amazing. Jesus Christ, bro. Number 13. End times. This episode is a 10 based on the tension alone. These really do seem like the end times. Hank has a hit on his head, the Whites are moving into the Schrader's house, Walt could be killed any minute, even Saul is trying to run away. But the big thing about this episode is the poisoning of the devil Brock. Jesse finds out that the doctors don't know what's wrong with him and that the symptoms seem very similar to Ryson's symptoms, so Jesse goes to Walt's house to kill him. They get into a heated argument until Walt is able to convince Jesse that Gus was the one that poisoned Brock, which gets Jesse on Walt's side. We now of course know that Walt actually did poison Brock, but he does an incredible job in manipulating Jesse into thinking it's Gus. If only people as smart as this were used for good things. Anyways, Jesse starts pissing Gus off at the hospital while Walt makes and plants a bomb on Gus's car, but when Gus starts walking towards it, he stops for a few minutes, then walks away, and the episode depressingly ends there. I don't know why everyone still speculates about how Gus knew to walk away. Ever since my first viewing, I always thought it was pretty obvious that Gus can see through the eyes of all of the birds in Albuquerque, which showed him the car bomb through this bird. Anyways, a very good episode. Number 12. Granite State. While mostly just being the episode in between Ozymandias and Felina, Granite State still manages to be a perfect episode in that regard. It starts off with Walt and Saul in Ed's basement, waiting to get shipped to their new labs in New Hampshire and Nebraska. Walt tries to act all Sigma on Saul until he has a cancer coughing fit, and Saul leaves and lives the rest of his life a very happy man in Omaha. Well, nobody cares about Walt. We care about Skyler, of course. Skyler's having some legal trouble, but she's also letting neo-Nazis break into her house at midnight and threaten her infant daughter just to make sure that bitch-ass Lydia won't get snitched on. Gotta love Jack's gang. Todd is still a W though. Speaking of Todd, he's a really nice guy and decides to bring his good friend Jesse some vanilla ice cream because of how much he appreciates him. Can we get a W Todd? Can we get a W Todd chain in the comments? Jesse also tries to escape his enslavement, which does not work, and instead of killing Jesse, Jack's gang goes to Andrea's house and kills her. It makes Jesse watch. Definitely one of the sadder deaths in the show, mostly because of Jesse's reaction. At least Brock is an orphan now. Back to Walt. He's now Mr. Lambert, a dying old man living in a cabin in New Hampshire. He's also very lonely and asks Ed to stay with him and play cards for a few hours on one of his monthly trips. Well, about 8 months go by since the events of Ozymandias, and Walt goes to a bar and calls Junior to tell him about some money that he's sending to his friend's house that's for the Whites. But Junior just yells at him for killing Hank and hangs up. Really sad scene. Then Walt calls the cops on himself since he has nothing left, but suddenly sees Gretchen and Elliot on the news claiming that Walt had barely anything to do with the creation of gray matter, which causes Walt to go back to New Mexico and tie up loose ends. Of course, the one thing that makes Walt go back to Albuquerque is his ego bigger than his head in El Camino. Well, it makes for a better episode. Not to say this episode's weak. I mean, it gave it a 10, so that was already pretty obvious. But number 11. 4 days out. I guess this could be considered a bottle episode, which it really isn't since they sell other meth they made in a few episodes. But if it is, then it's definitely the best. Basically, Walt thinks he's gonna die soon, so he lies to Jesse and tells him that their methylamine's going bad. So they need to go out in the desert and cook for 4 days straight. They do this, and by day 2, they would have already made $672,000 each from what they cooked, but Walt still has more methylamine and wants to cook the rest. But as soon as they go to drive to a hotel for the night, the episode gets good. Jesse left the key in the ignition, so now the engine won't go and they're stranded. They try everything they can, but the more things they try, the more things go wrong, and eventually they're out there for so long that it gets emotional. And I love Aaron Paul's acting in the scene where the engine starts for a second, then fails. This episode also has some of the funniest moments in the whole show.
What are we building? You said it yourself. A robot. Good, and what shall we use to conduct this beautiful current with? What one particular element comes to mind? Wire. Copper.
Well, eventually, Walt makes a battery and they make it back to Albuquerque, where Walt finds out that his tumor is shrunk by 80% in this amazing scene. But after he hears this news, he beats the shit out of a paper towel dispenser, which shows how he actually isn't happy with this news at all. I love this episode. From the funny moments to the emotional moments, it's amazing the whole way through. But when it comes down to it, the best part about this episode is Walt and Jesse's friendship. The scene of them discovering how much money they're going to make is probably the happiest you'll ever see the two together, and the two being the center of the episode is really great. Definitely a huge highlight from season 2. Number 10. Full Measure. I mean, what's to be said that hasn't been said already? Even though season 1 and 2 had great finales, season 3 just takes it to a whole nother level. We were left on the incredible cliffhanger of half measures, which we now need to deal with the consequences of. Walt meets Gus in the desert, and Gus agrees to let Walt continue cooking, but only with Gale. But while Walt cooks with Gale, Victor is there the whole time, monitoring every move Walt makes. Gale also starts asking Walt lots of questions about how he does things around the lab, which makes Walt realize Gus's plan, which is for Gale to memorize Walt's cook, then kill Walt. Meanwhile, Jesse is hiding in Saul's famous laser tag place.
And that goes double for you, hip-hop!
We then get an amazing scene from Walt and Hip Hop, where they discuss how they're going to move forward, which they have two options: rat out Gus to the police, or kill Gale. Jesse wants the first option, but Walt is set on the second. He has Jesse find Gale's address, and when he goes to his car to drive there, he gets picked up by Victor. Victor drives Walt to the laundry, and he and Mike try luring Walt down to the lab, but obviously Walt knows what's about to go on and says he'll give up Jesse if they let him go. He calls Jesse and frantically tells him that he has to do it. Then he says one of his most badass lines in the whole show, aka how to win a Discord argument.
6353 Juan Tabo, apartment 6.
Then Jesse shows up to Gale's apartment, and yeah, the last 10 minutes of this episode are just some of the most tense of the whole show, and this whole episode is just such a great finale to the season. Definitely one of the best in the whole series. Also, rest in peace, Gale, he did nothing wrong. Number 9. 1 minute. This episode is just a roller coaster of emotions. The intro of this episode is a flashback to when the Salamanca cousins were children, and also to when Hector could talk, which means this is the first time we ever see him do so. This scene not only foreshadows the ending of this episode, but shows off Hector's character so well, which is great since we're not really able to see much of it during Breaking Bad. Anyways, the real first scene of the episode has Hank beat the absolute living shit out of Jesse, which is so insane. This is some cliffhanger shit, not the first fucking scene of an episode. I guess that shows how good this episode is. Since Hank really is a good person on the inside, he comes to his senses and basically turns himself in. Anyways, Jesse's in the hospital and we get a hilarious line from Saul.
There it is. Yo, Adrian. Rocky called. He wants his face back.
We also get the first of 2 insane Jesse monologues of this episode, which I think are some of Aaron Paul's best acting, which is definitely saying something. On my first viewing of the show, Bryan Cranston was always my favorite actor, but on my rewatch, it's easily Aaron Paul, not to discredit Bryan at all. Even though Walt is my favorite character of the season, I also love Jesse so much in this season. Drug-free, rational Jesse makes for some of the most emotional and amazing scenes in the whole show. Anyways, we see Hank having a meeting with the DEA where he says everything that happened, and after this, he cries to Marie in the elevator. A big reason why I love this episode so much is that it's when Hank finally snaps, which we've been waiting for practically since he killed Tuco. He finally talks to Marie and shows his feelings, which is what makes his character relatable yet so greatly written. They also somehow turn the scene comical, with Marie admitting at the end that she already told Skyler. Speaking of Skyler, she goes to Walt's new apartment to try to get Walt to talk to Jesse so he doesn't press charges, and her reasoning is that Hank is Walt's family, to which Walt says, not currently, which is so cold yet true. Always great to see Skyler get shade thrown at her for being a bitch, even though any sane person would also probably divorce their significant other if they learned that they had been manufacturing methamphetamine for the past 3 months as well. But that's besides the point. Walt then starts having problems in the lab with Gale, so he talks to Gus, who agrees to let Jesse be Walt's new lab partner. Here we get, in my opinion, Aaron Paul's best scene ever, or at least top 3. The amount of emotion he portrays is actually insane. This monologue was really warning all of us how much Walt used Jesse 2 seasons before we actually realized. And all of that just for Jesse to agree to Walt's deal after he complimented his cook. Well, then we have the final scene, and do I really need to talk about it? If you've seen Breaking Bad, then you know this is up there alongside
This is not meth.
than the Gus death scene with some of the greatest moments in the whole show. Shout out to Hank for killing 2 Salamancas and still making it out alive, even though it's only because one of them went to go get his axe instead of shooting Hank in the head. I originally just thought this was plot armor, but now it makes so much sense, since revenge is the biggest thing in the Salamanca family, which is why a bullet to the head would be too easy. Anyways, yeah, incredible episode. Number 8. Tahajuli. When I'm speechless, even when it's my second time watching the episode, you know it's good. Well, let's start from the beginning. In the intro, we see Todd being a sim for Lydia, and we see his awesome ringtone when Walt calls him to order the hit on Jesse. Speaking of that, I actually can't believe the writing in the show is so good to where we can still be rooting for a man that has done this much of bad this far into the show, and trust me, I was one of those people. Anyways, Walt once again uses Andrea to get to Jesse, which doesn't work at all, since Hank has Jesse's phone. We get to see Saul interact with Junior, which is almost up to Lalo and Howard interaction levels of surrealism. I don't know why Junior's face when he sees Saul is so fucking funny, but it is. Also, Saul's iconic line.
Don't drink and drive, but if you do, call me.
Then we get to the real good part of this episode. Jesse sends Walt a picture of some money in a barrel, which is literally in Hank's backyard. The fact that Walt didn't even take a second look. Anyways, Walt speeds over to his money to try to stop Jesse, and this has to be the smartest thing Jesse has ever thought of in this show. Outsmarting Walt is not easy to do, so he really hit him in his weak spot. As soon as Walt gets there, he knows what Jesse did and calls Jack as soon as he sees a car coming. But while he's on the call, he sees Hank and Gobi get out of the car. The look Walt gives is the definition of defeat, and he calls off the hit on Jesse. Before I say any of what's about to happen, I just want you to know that I really can't put into words how incredible the last 10 minutes of this episode are, so if it sounds like I'm underplaying it, please understand that I know how good it is. Anyways, Walt accepts defeat and comes out of hiding, turning himself into Hank. This is genuinely one of the most satisfying scenes in the whole show. Well, at least this part of the scene. Hank handcuffs him, tells him that he has the right to remain silent, then Jesse comes over and spits on him. Walt gets into Hank's truck, then Hank calls Marie, and this is actually one of the saddest scenes of the whole show for, you know, obvious reasons. And then a few seconds later, Jack's gang shows up. Walt is screaming at the top of his lungs for them to leave, but they're not budging, and a shootout starts between the Nazis and Hank and Gomi, which they leave on a fucking cliffhanger. If you saw this episode when it first aired, I'm sorry you had to wait a week to see Ozymandias. That must have been brutal. But overall, this is the episode we've been waiting for ever since Walt killed Jane, or ever since Walt forced Jesse to kill Gale, or ever since Walt poisoned Brock, or ever since Walt killed Mike, or whenever you stop rooting for Walt. This is what it amounted to. This show is so good that it's still a lead-up episode to something better. Incredible. Number 7. Confessions. While Hank gets closer to fully exposing Walt, we get more of a Jesse Sider episode here. We definitely see lots of Hank and Walt's feud though, and we get their first interaction since their fight. Walt and Skyler invite Hank and Marie to dinner and use the excuse of it being about Marie trying to lure Junior into their house thing and tell him. They get into a heated argument where we see Hank at probably the angriest he's ever been. Marie also tells Walt to kill himself, which is fucking insane. After Hank calls Walt's bluff enough, he decides to leave, but slips Hank a DVD. We then get genuinely one of the best scenes in the entire show. I obviously remembered it being really good, but not this good. This might genuinely be a top 5 scene of the whole show. We get a teaser of the confession earlier in the episode where it seems like Walt is actually confessing, but when Hank and Marie watch it, we find out that it's just a threat from Walt that he'll release this tape if Hank goes any further with this investigation. In this tape, Walt makes up a story that Hank forced Walt into cooking meth for his drug empire and names off lots of things Walt did but puts Hank's name to it. This all seems like it couldn't be proved until Walt brings up the fact that he paid for Hank's medical bills, which can be proved. Hank had no idea that this ever happened, and his realization when Marie tells him is heartbreaking. Hank knows he's dead. Unless someone snitches on Walt, then he's never catching him. And even besides that, Walt's story being so perfectly calculated and worded, everything about the scene is so good. We've been watching this family for 5 seasons, and seeing what it's come to, the writing of the show is actually unbeatable. The rest of this episode is mostly about Jesse, where he has a meeting with Walt and Saul in the desert. Walt tries convincing Jesse to use Saul's disappearer and leave town, since he has nothing left in his normal life and actually has the ability to use a reset button. Thankfully, Jesse isn't stupid and he's able to read right through Walt, seeing that he's only telling Jesse to do this so there's less of a risk of Walt getting caught. Jesse tells Walt this, and it's heartbreaking seeing him scream to this man that he spent the last year with that he doesn't care about him and that if he doesn't move, he'll kill him the same way he killed Mike. I do believe that Walt does actually care about Jesse, but since he's a sociopath, he still tries using him. After Jesse screams at him, he gives him a fake ass hug and the scene ends. Even though Jesse knows Walt is obviously trying to manipulate him, he actually takes his advice and gets Saul to call the disappearer. We get a funny line from Saul.
Asked me to send you out with something extra. Get you started, you know, keep you sitting pretty until you get into the groove of your new life.
Provided, of course, you don't toss it out the window on the way.
A final handshake, which, by the way, I just want to mention how Jesse was like the only person to give Saul his final handshake, and he leaves. But right before he gets into the car, he realizes that Saul took the ricin cigarette off him, and that Walt actually did poison Brock. He rushes back to Saul's office, beats the shit out of him, steals his gun, and makes him admit to it. Saul admits but says he had no choice and they didn't want to do it. Jesse then steals Saul's car and drives to Walt's house, and the episode ends with him pouring gasoline all over Walt's living room. What an episode. Pretty much all of Walt's relationships by this point are done. Only good people he has left are Saul and Skyler. Everyone else is either gone or a neo-Nazi. You don't really realize how good this part of the show is until you rewatch it. Number 6, Grilled. I'm pretty sure this was supposed to be the finale of season 1, and it makes sense. The stakes are the highest they've been up to this point, seeing as Tuco is holding Walt and Jesse hostage at some hut while Walt's family is putting flyers around town trying to find him. Every scene with Tuco is so tense, from the taco scene to the chili powder scene. Speaking of the chili powder scene, I remember getting really mad at Jesse for screwing that up the first time I watched. Now that I'm rewatching it, I remember the fact that Hank shoots Tuco like 30 minutes later, so it does not matter at all. Anyways, this episode is also the introduction to Hector, one of the most important characters in the Breaking Bad universe, and he's as psychotic as ever. That smile he gives while Tuco brings Jesse outside to shoot him is definitely the Hector I know from Better Call Saul. And the last 10 minutes of this episode are just insane. Walt and Jesse fighting Tuco is so tense, but so amazing and rewarding at the end by seeing Tuco just lay there bleeding in the pit. After rewatching the show, Tuco is definitely one of my favorites. If you ask me, Breaking Bad Tuco is easily the most psychotic in the whole universe, even beating out Todd and Lalo. But that's what makes him so interesting. He's just so entertaining to watch. His dialogue is also hilarious, and he's probably one of the dumbest characters in the whole show. Anyways, the final scene with Hank and Tuco is obviously great. Crazy how Hank found something he was looking for while looking for a completely different thing. Definitely one of the best episodes in the whole show. Number 5, Crawl Space. The amount of despair shown is just incredible. Insane writing all around. And that's literally just one scene. This episode also shows the aftermath of Salute, where Gus goes to Hector's retirement home to show him Eladio Shannon to inform him that multiple cartel members have been killed, meaning Hector's really the only one left. Again, after watching Better Call Saul, these scenes hit so much harder, and they show how amazing Gus's character really is at the time. Of course, on Skylar's side, we have her and Ted's ongoing beef with the 600K, which leads to the legendary scene of Huel and Kubi breaking matters to the plot. Walt realizes that Jesse has been cooking without him, so he goes to Jesse's house to talk him and interrupts him while he's playing Sonic 06 with Satan himself. Jesse gets very mad at Walt and pushes him away for good reason. Then right after, Walt gets fucking electrocuted by Tyrus out of nowhere and brought to the desert where this iconic scene happens. On said,
I will kill your wife. I will kill your son. I will kill your infant daughter.
Also, shout out to Walt for causing one of the only times that Gus ever showed emotion. Walt rushes to Saul's office and we get an incredible scene where we get the proper introduction to the Vanisher, and I love Saul's line here.
But this is a vacuum cleaner repair company.
What'd you expect? Haji's quick vanish?
But one more thing I want to talk about is the amount of foreshadowing in this episode. We have Ted early in the episode almost trip over his rug, which is how he breaks his neck later on in the episode. While Gus is showing Eladio Shane to Hector, there's an explosion playing on the TV, which might be a stretch, but I'm pretty sure it's foreshadowing because that's also exactly how they sit in the explosion scene, he realizes. I should probably stop yapping so much, just know how fucking good this episode is. Number 4. Dead Freight. This is probably the most unique episode in the whole entire show. There's not a single episode similar to it. Even for something like Felina, it is a bit similar to maybe Face Off, but this is completely unique in the best way possible. It's pretty much a GTA mission where Walt, Jesse, Mike, Todd, and Kubi pull off the greatest train heist in history. They steal 1,000 gallons of methylamine, which ends up being worth tens of millions of dollars, and they're never caught, which is the best part. But let's back up a little bit. Before this idea even comes into play, we have Mike try to deal with Lydia. To do this, Mike writes Lydia a script that she reads out to Hank on a phone call while she's handcuffed to a table. They then listen to Gomi deny Hank that a GPS was planted on the methylamine through a bug that Walt put in Hank's room. And as Mike goes to kill Lydia, it's revealed that the GPS was planted by the DEA. So Lydia isn't killed, but still has to compromise, and she tells the trio about the ocean of methylamine. On the boring family side, we get the best nickname in all of Breaking Bad.
What about Emo McGee?
And we get this badass line from Walt.
Out burying bodies?
Robbing a train.
There's not much family stuff in this episode, which is definitely for the best since they're literally robbing a fucking train. Speaking of that, Todd asks some questions while they're preparing for the heist, and he's told by both Walt and Jesse that absolutely nobody besides the people involved are allowed to know about the heist, which kind of contradicts Walt telling Skyler in like the next scene, but you know, that's besides the point. Then the train heist happens, and it's easily one of the best scenes in the whole entire show. The intensity is at a 10 throughout the whole thing. Walt also might be the greediest person in the world, but it was successful, so who cares? And to top it off, Todd shoots some kid in the head. The first time I watched this scene, I walked around my house for 5 minutes in disbelief of what I just witnessed. It was that crazy. I know it's an unpopular opinion, but I'm a big fan of Todd's character, and this would probably be the best episode to explain it. I don't think Todd is a psychopath like Gus or Tuco, but he's definitely a sociopath. I genuinely think he acts how he acts because of the way he was raised and brought up by his Nazi uncle and his gang, to where he'll literally kill a fucking child just because he might have seen a stray eyes. It's not like he particularly enjoys doing it, he just does it out of instinct, which is so interesting to me. I also love how he just randomly comes into the plot and changes the whole thing out of fucking nowhere. Genius writing. This episode is also pretty good besides that, you know, it's alright. Number 3, Ozymandias.
After the previous episode shootout, we are shown an injured Hank and a dead Gomez. After checking Hank's identification and figuring out he's with the DEA, Jack readies to end Hank. Walt is taken away from the vehicle to negotiate. He offers
$80 million.
for Hank's safety, but Jack turns down his offer and inevitably fires his pistol. Jack locates the barrels of $80 million and digs it up with his crew, leaving behind $10 million for Walter to use for himself. However, during this, Walter spots Jesse and reminds Jack of the deal they made. Walter reveals his location and Jesse is taken into captivity instead of dying, contrary to their deal. Walter takes this opportunity to tell Jesse,
I watched Jane die.
During the shootout, Walt's vehicle was punctured by a stray bullet, leaving Walt to roll his $10 million down for a trade of a beat-up pickup truck. Mary, informed with outdated sources, proudly tells Skylar of Walt's arrest and tells her to go tell Junior. Junior is then told of Walt's doings. Walter later arrives in a panic for their belongings. However, Skylar, knowing of Hank's arrest on Walt, realizes
You killed Hank.
Suddenly, the family erupts into a fight, later seeing Skylar pull out a knife on Walter. Walter and Skylar then have a fun game of tug-of-war for control over the weapon. After the fight, Junior calls the police, and Walt takes Holly and runs. Because of this stunt, police and Mary arrive at the White residence and have Skylar call Walter. This phone call was tapped during the call. Walter takes full responsibility in the call and confirms Hank's death, much to Mary's dismay. By the end, we see Holly in the fire department and we see a Walter White disappear into the horizon. My thoughts? Honestly, I love this episode. I mean, I originally didn't pick up on Walt taking all the blame during the phone call with Skylar and the police. But after rewatching and taking note from some of the comments, I saw what the comments were talking about. I mean, it's such a beautiful detail to include in the episode alongside Walt telling Jesse about Jane. Walter, furious that Jack didn't shoot Jesse on the spot, figuratively kills Jesse by revealing the darkest news he could muster in the heat of the moment. I mean, it worked. Another underrated part of the episode is just the rolling barrel scene. The soft music playing in the background, the hidden meanings in the lyrics, wait, are those Walter's pants from the pilot? Anyways, despite not being the scene directly after Hank's death, I was still in shock what had just happened previously when the scene was rolling. This scene was a huge break from the tension and the action. I mean, kill me for it, but this is one of the greatest scenes in the show in my opinion. I mean, I'm running out of time. So in my humble personal opinion, this is probably the second best episode.
I'm really glad Gavin picked this episode because I have nothing to say. There's a reason this is the only TV episode in history that has a 10 out of 10 on IMDb. Remember every time Skylar said something like, you got what you wanted, hope you're happy, after she tried opposing something that Walt wanted but didn't succeed? Well, that's a great description of the first 10 minutes of this episode. Walt got what he wanted. He's a millionaire, he's alive, and he isn't in jail. But at what cost? 90% of his money was stolen by the neo-Nazis, his brother-in-law is dead, his best friend is a slave, his whole family hates him. Speaking of his family, this scene with Walt, Skylar, and Junior is my new favorite scene in the entire show. It was always my favorite scene of this episode, but on rewatch, this scene is so goddamn good. Everything is just perfect about it. Again, thank God for Gavin, because I would never be able to articulate my thoughts well enough. It's that good. And even though this is my favorite scene, my favorite writing of the whole show comes with the phone call scene. The writing here is so good that I didn't even fully understand it until my rewatch. Again, thank you to Gavin for picking this episode, because I'd be stuck trying to give this episode enough credit. Number 2. Face Off. Do I really need to explain this one? This is one of the highest on the list due to every single component of this episode being perfect. Sure, I might have given Salute a 10, but that's mainly due to the Gus, Mike, and Jesse plot in Mexico. I didn't love the scenes with Walt and Skylar. With Face Off, everything is perfect. The scene where Walt brings a bomb into the hospital is hilarious, and so is the scene of Walt breaking the door in Saul's office. Walt's plan to kill Gus with Hector is one of the smartest things he ever did. The scene with Hector and the DEA is so funny, and obviously Gus's death scene. This scene has to be one of the most iconic scenes in TV history, and for good reason. It's such a great way to end Gus's character, showing him fix his tie while he's literally a two-faced corpse. And it doesn't even end there. The scene with Walt and Jesse burning down the lab is incredible, along with the final scene of the whole season. I'm obviously very happy that we got a Breaking Bad Season 5, but if we didn't, this honestly would be a pretty great final scene, which is something I cannot say for the final scenes of Seasons 1, 2, and 3. Jesse and Walt shaking hands, along with Walt and Skyler's phone call, Walt's iconic
I won.
and then we get that amazing song that plays while Walt drives away, and it all ends on a reveal showing that Walt actually did poison Brock. Fucking genius. Bravo, Vince. One thing I do actually want to talk about is how insane Walt acts in this episode. I know the whole "this is the moment where Walter White becomes Heisenberg" thing is really drawn out by now and stupid in my opinion, but this episode is definitely a turning point for Walt. He's definitely done some insane shit in the past, like letting Jane die and running the dealers over, but this episode he just does a whole lot of shit. Ignoring the fact that he killed Gus, Hector, and Tyrus in a hospital bombing, he just casually shoots and kills 2 of Gus's men in the lab, which is something that took him so much to do in Season 1. He also has this innocent neighbor go into his house to basically use as a shield for himself. Nothing ended up happening to her, but she easily could have been killed just because Walt was a selfish jackass and decided that his life was worth more than his neighbor's. And if you want to push it, he also poisons Brock just to manipulate Jesse back on his side. While he technically does this in End Times, that episode takes place on the same day, so it's like the same thing. And I think that's easily one of the worst things Walt ever did. But it makes sense when you think about it, seeing as he turns into a psychopath by Season 5, which is an episode after this. Sorry for the digression, go to the episode. Number 1. Felina. Even the people who say Ozymandias is the best episode at least understand the greatness of this. And I understand the greatness of Ozymandias. It's an emotional roller coaster all the way through. But at the end of the day, I go to a show to be entertained, and there isn't a single other episode of the show that's more entertaining to me than the series finale, Felina. Maybe it's because of how perfectly they ended the greatest show of all time, maybe it's because of how ironic it is, or maybe it's because every single scene is jam-packed with the perfect writing, directing, cinematography, and acting to make for one of, if not the greatest episode in television history. I definitely need to watch more shows to know that for sure, but from what I've seen, nothing beats Felina. The scenes with Gretchen and Elliot are phenomenal. They add so much suspense and tie Walt's character so well. You're lying if you didn't think Walt was going to kill them on your first watch. And the reveal of Skinny Pete and Badger being the 2 best hitmen west of the Mississippi is so fucking good. The scene where Walt tells Lydia and Todd about his new formula is great, but for, different reasons than you'd think. But I'll get to that in a second. I love Walt and Skyler's final interaction. It has everything. It has Walt tell Skyler the truth about Hank. It has him give her the coordinates to his body. We even finally get Walt admit that he only cooked meth for himself, which is great since he's been justifying this whole thing for the past 2 years by using the excuse of doing it for his family, which might have started as the truth, but as the seasons progressed, it became more and more of a lie. Then we get the scene with Jack and his men, which lasts for a good third of the whole episode, and every second of it is the best ending you could possibly ask for. Walt knows he fucked up, so saving Jesse and freeing him is the least he could do for the poor man that he's manipulated for the whole show. His car plan was probably the most genius thing he ever did, and his murder of Jack is very satisfying, seeing him die mid-sentence like Hank, alongside Todd's death being very well deserving, especially after El Camino. Walt then hands over the gun to Jesse so he can kill him, but as we know, Jesse isn't exactly a sociopath like Walt and can't kill people that easily, so he gives Walt the gun and says,
Then do it yourself.
We then have Todd's phone ring, and I completely forgot about his Lydia ringtone, so I was laughing my ass off when that happened. And we get the best scene in the entire show where Walt tells Lydia he poisoned her with ricin. Okay, I'm joking about the best scene of the whole show thing, but on my rewatch, Lydia has become my least favorite character in the whole show, besides Brock, of course. So I was very happy watching this. We then get one final, hard-hitting look between Walt and Jesse, before Jesse drives Jack's car away into the distance, aka to Badger's house. The scene where he's screaming of happiness while driving is so great, which is why El Camino doesn't have to exist. I'm glad it does, but I wouldn't be mad if it didn't. It's like Toy Story. Toy Story 3 had a perfect ending, but Toy Story 4 existing doesn't make me... Actually, never mind, it does. Anyways, Walt realizes that he's about to die, so he goes into Jack's lab and takes one last look at his real passion, then drops to the floor and dies, while Baby Blue plays, of course. Perfect ending, perfect finale, perfect season, perfect show. Also, fuck Ted. Alright, thank you all so much for watching this video. I want to do like a little thing like I do with the interlude. I just want to give my top 10 favorite Breaking Bad characters real quick. I'm not going to make this too long. I'm just going to give my favorites. Alright, so my number 10, I'm going to have a tie between Huel and Kuby because they're like the same character, but they're both great. If we're talking about the whole Breaking Bad, Better Call Saul universe, obviously I put Huel above Kuby because like Huel's a pretty big part of Better Call Saul. I just want to say I want to do a Better Call Saul ranking either later this year or early next year, so tell me below if you guys want that. I will do things like this while I'll rank the seasons in the interlude, and I'll do it top 10 characters at the end, and then maybe I'll do a top 10 characters of the whole universe. We'll see, but for now this is just Breaking Bad characters. Number 9 is another tie between Skinny Pete and Badger. Again, they're very similar characters, but I love them both, so I'm just putting them both. At number 8 I have Gomi. Such a great side character. Him and Hank's banter is just amazing. I love it. And then, like, just, bro, his death is just heartbreaking, man. They didn't even show it on screen. That is just, he deserved way better. So rest in peace, Gomi. But yeah, number 8. Number 7, I have Tuco. I think Tuco, like, was in the show for, like, the perfect amount of time. I feel like if he was in it any less, then, like, he wouldn't really, like, be fleshed out enough. But if he was in it any more, then he, like, it would have became too much. So I'm so happy, like, he was in there for, like, the perfect amount. It was really cool seeing him in Better Call Saul too. He was a great villain. So yeah, number 7. Number 6, I have Mike. People will probably be mad that I don't have Mike in the top 5. Even that I don't have Mike at number 1, since I know a lot of people put Mike at number 1. With Breaking Bad's context, I don't really understand Mike at number 1. With Better Call Saul's context, I do. Not with Breaking Bad context, but he's still an incredible character. I mean, he has so many legendary scenes in the show. Again, I don't really love his death, but, you know, I already talked about that. Number 5, I have Saul. Again, if this was like a whole universe ranking, he'd be either like 1 or 2. But I mean, I feel like him being number 5 in this show alone kind of shows how great he is. He's just so funny, man. Like, every scene with Saul is just incredible, bro. Oh my god, like, I don't know if I would call him a side character or not, but like, he's not like a main character. Like, you don't ever get a Saul scene, right? But like, oh, bro, he's so funny, and that's why Better Call Saul is great, because like, he's not the funniest in Better Call Saul. Like, it's to flesh out his character more, but like in Breaking Bad, he's just hilarious. So yeah, Saul number 5. Number 4, I have Hank. I mean, like, just throughout the show, you're just watching his investigation of Heisenberg just get closer and closer, and as it gets closer and closer, he becomes more broken. It's just like heartbreaking to see. And just like the last season, man, Hank is just, God, it's just depressing. And it's so cool seeing him throughout the whole show. And of course, 1 minute's a legendary episode with Hank. Hank's just had so many legendary moments the whole show. You gotta give him like high ranking, man. And number 3, I have Gus. I mean, Gus is just maniacal, man. Like, oh my god, Box Cutter, Face Off. Like, so many legendary scenes from Gus. The whole cartel thing. Again, he might be higher with Better Call Saul, but Gus just goes so hard in Breaking Bad. At number 2, we have Jesse. I think like Hank, Jesse, we just like see him like go from like in season 1 this like stupid junkie to like season 5. It's just like, oh my god, it's insane. Just watch Breaking Bad. I feel like I don't really need to explain how good Jesse is, but yeah, obviously number 2. I think he's more relatable than Hank too, which is why I like him more. And then number 1, obviously Walter White. What do you want me to say? I mean, who else could this have possibly been? Obviously, it's Walt. I mean, the whole show is just about his character, how he turns from a good guy to a bad guy, and it's incredible. So, yeah, Walt's number 1. Thanks for watching.